The story begins with a girl crying. The children are good and angelic, unlike any others in the world. A young nun closed her eyes and placed her hands on the little girl's shoulders to comfort her. A boy with black hair also closed his eyes and smiled at the little girl. However, not everyone can be a parent. The young nun and the children turned their heads to see a man standing a few feet away. The man looked down at the children, resting one hand on the black-haired boy's shoulder. While smoking a cigar with his other hand, he announced that, from today onwards, he would be the boy's father. These children have received special education for their special parents. The children waved goodbye to the black-haired boy. He looked back as his new father took him away. The children watched as the black-haired boy was taken away. The young blonde-haired nun brought her hands together, closed her eyes, and smiled. Suddenly, her expression changed. Clasping her hands together with a serious look, she told the children it was time to train. With cold expression, the children brought out their weapons. The young nun told Ellie, the blonde girl who was crying, that she shouldn't let her nose get runny like that when she cries. Ellie's innocent face turned stone cold as she wrapped a piece of string around her hands, looking at the nun with a fierce gaze. The blonde nun took off her scarf and, with a serious gaze at Ellie, said that children who behave too well will make their parents hate them. Ellie turned slightly, brought her hand to her nose, and blew away the snot hanging from it. The director of the orphanage, who takes great pride in this special education approach, he views it as a true gift for these kids, who have been trained as living, breathing weapons ever since they learned to walk. These children are raised under extremely strict supervision to meet the standards of the super rich. Due to this meticulous attention to detail, it costs a fortune to train each child properly. Another question that might come to mind is what these kids are actually used for. There's no straightforward answer to this, and the director simply says they're like computers. Their use is decided by the buyers, or as you might call them, the new parents. For example, the rich fat man who just adopted a boy shows his new son a photo of a man and says, "This is his target. Memorize his face." The director then explains that since these children are living weapons, they pose a significant threat to the buyer. So the orphanage ensures that each child is drilled with 3 absolute principles from a young age. These rules, wired into their subconscious minds, are called the 3 absolute principles and are crucial for keeping the children under control. While the fat man is drilling the boy about memorizing the photo, the boy points out that there's a car tailing them closely. The old man, startled by this unexpected observation, starts yelling at the boy, demanding to know what he's talking about and telling him to just focus on memorizing the picture. The boy quickly snaps back to attention and swears to follow orders. That's what the first principle is all about: absolute compliance with the parents' commands. Suddenly, the car tailing them smashes into their vehicle, causing it to flip over from the impact. The boy scrambles out and sees his father badly hurt and barely clinging to life. The second principle these children are drilled with is to never use their powers without their parents' permission. As the boy mourns his father, the attackers get out of their cars with guns in hand. Cautiously approaching the flipped car, they spot the boy crying and begging for help, shouting that his dad isn't breathing. The attackers are taken aback, having no idea there was a child in the car. They decide to toss the boy aside to finish their work, but before they can, the boy whips out a knife and stabs one of them in the throat, causing profuse bleeding. He then quickly snatches the gun from the fallen attacker. Before the other hitman even realizes what's happening, the boy aims the gun at him and shoots him in the head, killing him instantly. And that's what the third rule is all about. Forget the first 2 principles and do whatever it takes to keep your parents safe. The director, meanwhile, couldn't be prouder of his children. He is practically bursting with joy and pride for raising such perfect, exceptional children. He quickly shows the register book containing information about each child and asks the buyer which one he would prefer. But the buyer flatly refuses any of them. So, the old man puts the register book back in the drawer and reluctantly pulls out a file for a child already deemed a defective product. He's disappointed that the buyer is only interested in this particular child. Apparently, this misfit was a real gem, even a favorite of the director. He had the best skills out of all the weapons they had trained, and the old man was practically swooning over him. But the child disappeared, leaving the director wondering if he's even still alive. They've been on a wild goose chase to find him, but since he's parentless, he can't use his powers without permission. With 0 leads, they're in the dark, and he's likely living incognito as just another regular high school kid. Ironically, this supposed ultimate weapon is probably getting pushed around by school bullies. After taking a punch from a guy in a white hoodie, he's down for the count, writhing in agony from that one brutal hit. Being a top-tier weapon doesn't always mean you can handle a schoolyard smackdown. Yousef, with deadpan eyes, hovers over him, asking how many points he'd give that punch. The poor boy stammers, that's a solid 180,000 points right there." The other bullies high-five Yousef for racking up such a high score. Yousef then decides he wants to play further, planning to test his kick to see how many points he can score this time. But before he can approach Hunho again, a blonde guy shoves Yousef aside and rushes up to Hunho, eager to know how many points his punch can earn. Yousef doesn't appreciate being pushed by some lowly weirdo, and even Hunho can tell he's pissed about the blonde's shove. So, Yousef silently strolls over to the riled-up blondie, Cion. When he gets there, he slaps Cion across the face and casually says, "Just paying you back, buddy. No hard feelings." Despite hating the humiliation of the slap, Cion swallows his pride and gives a thumbs up to his friend for a solid 180,000-point slap. Yousef with the deadpan eyes just smiles and casually walks away, telling Cion he can buy him a pack of cigarettes instead of offering flattery. Before Yousef leaves, Cion challenges him, promising to fight him next time. Meanwhile, Hunho is completely fed up with these ragtag idiots because he knows he could take them all down in one fell swoop. Still, he plays the role of the dumb weakling, and Cion starts choking him, demanding to know if Yousef's punch is really better than his. Cion continues bullying him, treating Hunho like his personal punching bag to vent his frustration, and tells him to tag along for a while. With no way out, Hunho reluctantly follows the rowdy thug and ends up footing the bill for their meal because Cion claims he's broke after running errands for Yousef. Cion then wonders aloud who would win if he fought Yousef head-on. In response, Hunho says he can't say anything for sure. Out of nowhere, Cion notices the snack shop has the same name as Hunho, and Hunho sheepishly admits it's run by his mom. Right on cue, his mother shows up and says if Cion is her son's friend, he can eat as much as he wants. Cion is genuinely surprised to learn this is Hunho's mother's shop, while Hunho feels disappointed because he had been trying to keep it a secret. He's unsure why his secret had to come out thanks to this jerk, who's shamelessly licking his lips, likely looking forward to freeloading more food. Seeing the shifty look on his so-called friend's face, Hunho grabs his pen, ready to poke a hole in Cion's eyes if he tries anything sneaky. Just as he's about to make his move, Cion surprises him by apologizing for not introducing himself properly earlier. He introduces himself as Cion Park, Hunho's buddy, and comments that he finally understands the shop's unusual name. Hunho's mom chuckles at the joke and mentions that Hunho asked her to keep it under wraps. Cion then jabs at his friend, saying he's terrible at hiding things, and that he's also disappointed Hunho kept such a stunning mom a secret. Hunho, now completely fed up with Cion's antics, knows he's just trouble. To avoid any more nonsense, he tells his mom they need to leave because other friends are waiting for them. The woman packs some food in a plastic bag and hands it to Cion, telling him to share it with others. She warmly says that all of Hunho's friends are like her own children, so Cion shouldn't hesitate to take anything. While Hunho tries to convince her that it's not necessary, Cion's eyes light up at the sight of free food. Cion grabs the bag without a second thought, completely ignoring Hunho's internal groans. Hunho feels pathetic, silently begging his mom to reconsider, knowing these guys are just bullies, not real friends. He then pleads with Cion not to share the food with Yousef or anyone else. Cion agrees with a smirk and says his goodbyes. Hunho's mom, ever the gracious host, tells Cion to bring more friends next time. Cion enthusiastically agrees, saying he'll definitely come back with a crew. This is exactly what Hunho was trying to avoid, and here we are. Once Cion is out of sight, Hunho turns to his mom and vents his frustration. Fighting to hold back tears, he furiously demands to know why she didn't just pretend they weren't related. Seeing her son so upset, his mom is confused and hurt. She tells him she was just happy to meet his friend and apologizes if she caused any trouble. Meanwhile, Hunho is left questioning the rationality of his outburst. He has no idea why he's yelling at his mom, especially when she's apologizing. He feels awful for acting out. His mom tries to explain that she just wanted him to make more friends, which is why she acted the way she did. Hunho's hand shakes with frustration and confusion, and he's barely holding himself together. The next day at school, Hunho sees the same tteokbokki his mom makes sitting right before his eyes. Apparently, Yousef has figured out that Hunho's mom runs the snack shop down the street and grabbed a bowl for himself. Yousef takes a dirty rag, dips it into his bowl of tteokbokki, and starts rubbing it in Hunho's face. He complains that he found the rag in his food and demands a refund because he can't eat filth. To make matters worse, Yousef sarcastically asks if he should go directly to Hunho's mom for the refund. Hunho is absolutely livid with Cion for revealing his secret despite his pleas to keep it quiet. Trying to stay calm, Hunho responds coldly, questioning if they even consider themselves friends. This gets under Yousef's skin, and he mocks Hunho for throwing a tantrum over a little joke. Then, to add insult to injury, Yousef dumps the entire bowl of tteokbokki onto Hunho's uniform. That's the last straw. Hunho, already holding his pen, doesn't hesitate to swing his hand and jab the pen straight into Yousef's throat before he can react. His hand stops just short of the mark, trembling as he struggles to keep himself in check. Yousef, not thrilled about being threatened, becomes even more cocky and angry, demanding to know what Hunho thinks he's doing. A few moments later, Cion strolls into the classroom, only to find everyone in dead silence. The place is a mess. Security guards are on the scene, a window is shattered, blood is splattered across the floor, and Hunho's glasses are scattered on the ground. It looks like things have taken a serious turn, possibly even an attempted murder by Yousef. Just a moment ago, Hunho was mercilessly beaten by this jerk for about 15 minutes straight. He begged for mercy, drenched in his own blood, and lost consciousness several times while writhing in pain. Despite his pleas, Yousef didn't stop and continued the relentless beating. When Hunho was completely worn out and shattered from the brutal assault, he looked out the nearby window and finally ended it by jumping out. Yousef, with no shred of empathy, he casually puffs on his cigarette and tells his friends to confess that they accidentally pushed Hunho out of the window while messing around. His friends are reluctant to take the blame. In fact, they refuse Yousef outright because they don't want to get into trouble. That's when Yousef brings up a useful Korean law known as the Juvenile Offender Law. He explains that he's no longer eligible for it because he's past the age limit, so he's asking his friends to help him out by confessing that they were the ones who pushed Hunho out of the window. He insists that this is the only way he can avoid jail time. Still, the other boys are hesitant and remind him that even if they take the blame, they'll face a civil lawsuit. Yousef just shrugs it off, saying he's got that covered too. He then points out that the civil lawsuit hasn't been filed yet, and if they eliminate Hunho's only surviving family member, his mother, there will be no one left to file the lawsuit. Yousef also brings a suitcase full of cash, offering 10 million won per person in exchange for their help. Once everything's settled, they decide to visit the grieving mother that night. She's sitting in her son's room, surrounded by his belongings, lost in her grief, still trying to cope with the loss of her son. As midnight strikes, the thugs put on their masks and head straight for the 5th floor. Finding the elevator out of order, they opt for the staircase. As they climb, they discover the elevator is jammed because someone has intentionally wedged it with a fire extinguisher, preventing it from moving. Before Yousef can figure out who might have done this, they hear a familiar voice. Cion is sitting on the staircase, already waiting for them to arrive. Yousef quickly asks what he's doing there, while the other lackey is thrilled to see him and invites him to join them. Cion gets up, ready for action, but not before asking 2 important questions. Hunho Place, which was a hidden gem only he knew about. Yousef casually pulls down his mask and explains that when Cion didn't bring the cigarettes he was supposed to, he followed him and saw him hanging out with the neighborhood kids. That's when he spotted Hunho arguing with his mother. Cion realized it was actually because of him that these thugs discovered the place. Cion then moves on to his second question, telling Yousef to think carefully before answering. He wants to know why they're really there. That's when Yousef brandishes his iron pipe and says they're just there to deal with Hunho's mother, prevent her from filing a lawsuit, and ensure she sleeps peacefully. He's actually glad Cion is there too, because he's been getting on his nerves lately. Yousef brings up the push from earlier and realizes that Cion was just pretending to bully Hunho while actually trying to protect him. Yousef admits he was too dense to see it sooner and has been itching to take care of Cion as well. With that, Cion ends the interrogation. He picks up the fire extinguisher and Yousef swings his giant rod without hesitation. Cion quickly pulls the pin from the extinguisher, aims it at Yousef, and starts blasting him with the bubbly gas. As their vision blurs, one of the lackeys catches a glimpse of the extinguisher heading straight for his face. Before he knew it, the fire extinguisher smacks him in the face, and the impact sends Yousef sprawling to the ground as well. He quickly shoves his buddy off and grabs the rod again while handling the other two lackeys. When he sees Yousef making a move, he skillfully blocks the iron rod with the extinguisher. In a flash, he ducks down and slams the extinguisher onto Yousef's feet, crushing his toes. Cion then kicks him down the stairs, sending him tumbling backward. As he follows down the stairs, Cion casually informs Yousef that his cuneiform bone above the metatarsal is broken. He confidently adds that Yousef won't be walking anytime soon with those shattered legs. Yousef groans in pain, lying defenseless on the ground, and shakily asks why Cion is doing this to him. Cion then drops the bombshell. He explains that 3 principles were drilled into his mind as a kid. First, a parent's word is absolute. Second, don't use violence without permission. As he said this, he lands a devastating punch right on the guy's head. The other lackeys on the ground are completely lost, not understanding a word of his rant. It turns out, Cion is actually the missing boy from the orphanage, not Hunho. After losing several teeth and with a broken nose, Yousef begs for forgiveness and pleads for Cion to stop. But Cion continues, explaining that the third principle is that if there's a threat to the parent's safety, the child can ignore the first 2 rules and handle the situation however necessary to protect the parent. Cion recalls Hunho's mother saying that all of Hunho's friends are like her own children, so basically, she's his mother now. And if anyone threatens his mother, he's got the green light to beat them to a pulp. With a resounding bang, Cion smashes Yousef's skull, the sound echoing through the building. The scene shifts back to the creepy orphanage, where the blonde sister is visiting the director. She informs him there's a call from Korea. When the director asks who it is, she replies that it's Beko personnel. The old man's interest is piqued as he recognizes the caller and quickly grabs the phone. The caller reports that they found the kid they've been hunting for, the legendary figure from the Dead Mansion project, codenamed Cion. Apparently, he's in Korea right now. The orphanage, known as Dead Mansion, is a highly funded multinational organization that produces weapons for the wealthy. In the eyes of the orphanage, he was the perfect child, and his codename is Cion Park. Cion was one of the children created by the Dead Mansion project, the pinnacle of their efforts. He excelled in infiltration, weapon skills, and VIP assassination. He was destined for a top client, a notorious Yakuza organization in Japan. However, a mix-up sent him to Korea instead. The director explains that it's been 5 years since the mishap, and they had almost assumed Cion was dead, so they gave up on him. Now, the man who seems more like a filthy, rich mafia boss than a father is thrilled they found him. The director quickly instructs the sister to bring Cion back as soon as possible, by any means necessary, because he can't wait any longer. The woman, who looks like a nun, let down her black veil, revealing her dead eyes. She promptly adheres to the order, stating she will proceed with the retrieval operation immediately. This lady in question goes by the name Rachel. As soon as she dropped her act as sister, she donned a tight, black, shiny suit, flexing her formidable muscles without holding back. She makes it clear that she will drag Cion back, even if it means using force. This woman is the Dead Mansion instructor, and her specialty remains unknown. However, the director quickly instructs her to simmer down, emphasizing that he needs Cion unharmed and that she doesn't need to use her guns. Embarrassed, she hastily picks up her robe to put it back on, muttering about how she was just getting into character. Kwon Byung-woo, Yousef's father, bows his head in apology to Hunho's mother. He promises to cover all medical expenses, mental damages, and any other compensation she might need. However, she firmly states that an apology won't suffice, as this isn't something that can be resolved with words alone. Nearby students are startled to see a wealthy man bowing his head in such a manner. Kwon Byung-woo finally lifts his head and turns around with a blank expression, announcing he will be taking his leave. The woman is utterly baffled by his strange behavior. In response, Kwon Byung-woo covers his face with a handkerchief and reveals that he came to make amends. But since they can't resolve anything through discussion, he decides to leave, as efficiency is key in all matters. He then strides towards his luxurious car, telling the woman that he knows other ways to resolve the mess, as he is quite the expert in such matters. With those parting words, his car speeds off. Once inside, he vents to his butler, complaining about how disgustingly stingy and smelly the place was, insisting they demolish it and construct a mixed-use complex instead. The wealthy man then inquires about Cion, asking his butler if they have dealt with the boy. The butler informs him that their people are already en route, and the secretary will call once the job is done. Kwon Byung-woo nods, gazing out of the car window as they head to Sanlim University Hospital. Yousef, his leg wrapped in bandages, looked annoyed as he pondered aloud about Cion, sensing something strange about him. He told his dad that Cion, the one who messed him up, was no ordinary boy. He kept rambling about some 3 engraved principles or something like that. His dad raised an eyebrow, asking if this was the new trend among children. Yousef just shook his head, admitting he hadn't a clue. Before Yousef could say more, his dad cut him off with a cold stare directed at the nurse, humbly requesting some privacy. Once she was out of the room, he slapped his son hard across the face, just like any typical father. What really grinds his gears isn't just that his son picked a fight, bullied a kid, and caused them to jump out of a window. No. What truly bothers him is that Yousef didn't clean up the mess afterward, leaving a trail of evidence. His father sternly reminds him that the basics of any job include never having to do something twice. With a menacing stare and lifting one finger, he tells Yousef to watch closely and learn from this chance to fix things. Meanwhile, Cion gets kicked in the chest by a group of goons sent by Yousef's father. The 3 men, dressed in 3-piece suits, look like they mean business. The leader puts on a pair of black gloves and watches as his lackeys drag the injured boy from the ground. Cion has no idea why he's being targeted. With a scowl, the leader delivers a series of stinging slaps to Cion's face. He didn't stop until Cion collapsed from sheer exhaustion. The man with glasses looked down at Cion while taking off his gloves, remarking that while Cion might have taken down 4 of his peers at once, things don't work the same way with adults. He then tossed his gloves onto Cion's head. One of the men grabbed Cion's arm, and the burly lackey yanked it straight, holding it firm. The leader then placed his foot on Cion's arm and applied all his weight, leaving him writhing in agony. Before they left, they ensured Cion understands this is payback for the humiliation and beating he inflicted on their young master, Yousef. They're sparing his life so he can reflect on his mistakes. As dusk settles, Cion sits there, snapping his shoulder back into place with a sneer. He chuckled at how the goons couldn't distinguish between a dislocated and a broken arm, despite all their big talk about being adults. The beating he received from the men was nothing compared to Aunt Rachel's thrashings. Cion was frustrated that he couldn't tap into his full strength without orders, but he is relieved knowing Yousef won't be bullying anyone else. As he heads out, grumbling to himself, he runs into Hunho's mother. She recognized him immediately while holding groceries and asked why he looked awful. Cion turned his head and greeted her with a warm smile. She then invited him to dinner. At the table, Cion gazed at the food, lost in thought. Hunho's mother had prepared a feast, urging him not to be shy and to eat his fill. When Cion heard her command to eat, his facial expression changed. He started to devour the food like a wild beast, driven by an instinct to comply with the care of someone he now sees as his parent. The mother then gently suggested that if he ate all of that in one go, he would get indigestion, and she instructed Cion to drink some water. Cion followed her advice, downing the water with a hearty gulp and letting out a satisfied burp afterward. He thanked her for the meal, and she smiled, happy to see him after such a long time. Cion's mood turned serious as he asked about Hunho's condition. She assured him that the surgery went smoothly and that Hunho was doing fine. She was hopeful for his recovery, confident that despite the challenges, Hunho would overcome them. But then, her strength seemed to crumble. Her hand started to shake, and tears flowed freely. She sobbed, feeling weak compared to her son and helpless as a mother. Her heartfelt wish spilled out. She wanted to destroy everyone who hurt Hunho, especially Yousef's father, and tear them all apart. Cion stayed quiet, watching Hunho's mother sob. As she turned around to apologize for her sudden outburst, Cion was already gone. Nightfall settled over the Byungwoo construction company. Inside the building, Yousef's father concluded a presentation, pleased with the third quarter results. Raising his glass, he thanked everyone for their hard work, acknowledging that Byungwoo Construction had come this far because of their dedication, even after the bankruptcy of their parent company. Among the crowd of employees stood a burly man who had beaten up Cion earlier. He gazed at his empty glass when a waiter in a black suit approached, offering wine. Just as the man said, "Pour some more," the waiter smashed the bottle right over his face. The bottle shattered upon impact, shards of glass flying everywhere. The man stumbled back as Cion smiled and told him he could now drink to his fill. Trying to gather himself, the man went for a counterattack, but Cion was ready. He shoved the broken glass he was holding into the man's hands like handing over a pair of gloves. Shocked by Cion's swift movements, the man looked at his hands, surprised to see glass covering them. But by then, it was too late. Cion swung his leg and kicked the man in the face. Cion grabbed some forks and knives and hurled them at the guards with deadly precision, each one hitting its mark perfectly. It didn't take long for everyone to realize something was wrong. Before anyone could react, several of the black-suited guards were already down, and people began screaming about a blonde boy who had caused all the chaos. The mention of a blonde-haired kid struck a chord with the company director as he watched his employees getting slaughtered. Meanwhile, Cion was hiding under a table, knife in hand. As he lifted the cover, he recalled the principles he had learned at the church, the good children of Dead Mansion. The first principle, a parent's words are absolute. Cion zipped past everyone, slicing through them as if they were nothing more than cucumbers with his tiny knife, adhering strictly to what he had been taught. He couldn't ignore the tears and pleas of the mother who wanted to destroy everyone who hurt her son, including Yousef's father. So, he's doing exactly what he's been told. Cion grabbed a tablecloth filled with cutlery, and as the men rushed toward him, he threw it at their faces. The weight of the cloth and its contents crushed them, leaving them screaming in pain. As the men stumbled, Cion swung a small table at them, then stood on top of it, pressing his weight down on the fallen men. Just then, a knife flew past him from behind. Cion ducked quickly, and the knife hits one of the black-suited guys in front instead. The one who threw the dagger is the same man with the black gloves, and he's impressed with Cion's reflexes. With a penetrating gaze, he's surprised to see that the arm he was sure he broke is still working. The man declared that this time he would break Cion's arm properly. Before he could finish putting on his black gloves, Cion grabbed his hand and punched him hard across the face. Expertly locking the man's arm, Cion coolly told him to watch closely. This is how to break someone's arm. Twisting the man's arm, he felt the bones crack as the man groaned in pain. As the man sprawled on the ground, a bullet zipped past him. Cion turned slightly to the shooter with a menacing stare. The shooter, Byung-woo, stood on the first floor, looking disappointed for missing his shot. Cion quickly raised his hand and called out that it's tough to hit from that distance unless one is a real pro. Byung-woo, intrigued, asked how he knew and whether he was a pro himself. Walking towards Cion, Byung-woo asked who the boy was. He mentioned hearing that Korean boys these days are into something called a crew, and asked if Cion was part of one. Cion responded that he didn't know what the heck that meant, but if Byung-woo was asking which crew he belonged to, then he proudly stated he was with the Hunho snack shop. The mention of Hunho snacks rang a bell for Byung-woo, and he promptly asked if Cion was referring to that smelly alleyway junk food place. With a sneer, Byung-woo shoved the gun barrel right between Sion's eyes and asked if the woman had tipped him off to kill him. Cion, with a menacing gaze, stated that Byung-woo was absolutely wrong because all she had said was to tear and crush him. Surprised by Sion's words, Byung-woo tried to figure out what he meant. With lightning speed, Cion disarmed the man who held the gun to his forehead. Then, he proceeded to punch him. Before Byung-woo could fall, he grabbed hold of Sion's waistcoat, calling him a bastard and questioning if this was revenge for the snack shop mother and son. Cion punched him again, stating this wasn't revenge or retribution, but the first principle. That one punch was enough to scramble Byung-woo's brain, and with Sion's final blow, he hit the ground, his face a bloody mess, nose and mouth bleeding from the impact. Cion made it clear he wasn't there to assist anyone. He was just following his parents' absolute commands. With that, he turned to walk away, while Byung-woo on the ground kept ranting about how he should have taken Cion out when he had the chance, regretting not sticking to his own motto of leaving no work unfinished. The man vowed that next time, he would kill them all. Cion grabbed the man's gun, aimed it at the chandelier, and told him to stop blabbering about pointless stuff. He fired a bullet, causing the chandelier to snap and crash down, crushing the man. As he walked away, Cion muttered the third principle. If there's a threat to a parent's safety, resolve the situation by any means necessary. Shaking his head, he muttered how both the father and son were really just the same. Back at the hospital, the nurse asked Yousef if he was feeling any discomfort. Covering his face with his hand, he retorted that it should be obvious he was in pain. The nurse mentioned she'd heard school violence could be intense these days, but she'd never seen anyone as badly hurt as him before. Yousef lifted his hand and peeked at the nurse. However, she wondered aloud if the kid who hit him must have been a real expert at fighting. Even for high schoolers, this was pretty extreme. As she squatted down to pick up her things, Yousef observed her closely. She grabbed a syringe and, with a piercing gaze, asked Yousef what he had been discussing with his father earlier about some 3 principles. Noticing the strange color of the injection, Yousef questioned what the heck she was about to inject him with. Rachel then pulled off her mask, laughing as she reassured him not to worry. She stated that as long as she only used half, he wouldn't die. Sitting next to Yousef, she leaned forward, pressing her arm against his chest, and questioned him again about the absolute 3 principles. Yousef winced in pain, closing one eye and gritting his teeth. Rachel leaned forward, locking eyes with Yousef, and asked if he knew what the 3 principles meant. Yousef stared back, intimidated by Rachel's dominating gaze. Yousef yelled that he didn't know what Rachel was talking about and demanded she get out of his room. That's when Rachel ripped off her wig and stopped playing games. She straightforwardly demanded if Yousef knew a boy named Cion. Rachel is known as a disciplinarian for Dead Mansion, specializing in disguise, infiltration, interrogation, and of course, torture. Sometime later, Rachel stood at the scene where Joseph's father had met his end, speaking on the phone. She informed the director that they had a problem. Codename Cion had used force. As she stared at the pile of corpses, she relayed this information to the priest. The priest stood up, placing one hand on his desk, unable to believe Cion would resort to brute force. Rachel stepped on a guard who had barely survived, stating that she had tracked Cion and arrived at the location, but he had already left. Moreover, Many seriously injured adult men were at the scene. Even if it was Cion, this should have been impossible due to the 3 absolute principles. She crouched down and carefully examined one of the bodies. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered. "Nothing like this has ever happened in the history of Dead Mansion." The director gnawed at his finger, grasping the gravity of the situation tied to the 3 absolute principles. He opened the cupboard where records of the good children were stored. As the door swung open, books tumbled off the shelves, and one fell open, revealing a picture of unknown children with a red, "Sold Out" stamp across it. He informed Rachel that if Cion was indeed breaking the 3 absolute principles, something was gravely wrong. The director began to contemplate the possibility that these weapons they sold at the Dead Mansion might disregard their orders and turn against them instead. Picking up a book from the shelf, he ordered Rachel to change their objective. Rather than capturing Cion, she needed to investigate him first. "Keep a close watch on him and find out if he really used force without permission," the priest ordered. Rachel understood her assignment. She pressed down harder on the injured guard beneath her foot. While on the phone with the priest, she glanced away as 2 unfamiliar men approached. The 2 men offered their support, suggesting that if she needed any assistance in Korea, the White Tiger workforce would be at her service. One of the men, who was bald and combing his remaining hair with a small comb, smiled at Rachel. The other, larger man, wearing glasses and smoking, also glanced at her. The larger man asked how an elementary school student could cause such a massacre. Still combing his hair, the smaller man noted that dealing with this situation would make him lose even more hair. As Rachel walked towards them, she informed the priest that she had made contact with the smoker and the bar-coated head. She assured the priest that she would begin observing Cion immediately. Rachel ignored both of them, walking straight past while still fiddling with her phone. The 2 men watched her as she left. The burly man pondered over Rachel's attire, noting that a black latex suit seemed inappropriate for a nun. The bald man, pointing with his comb, remarked that Rachel was Russian and, like his wife, was more open-minded. The next day, Rachel arrived at Cion's school in disguise. After completing her preliminary investigation, she had determined that Cion was enrolled here and that his supposed parents were actually fictitious identities. As she walked through the school, she casually waved at a passing student. Rachel's curiosity about Cion was piqued. She was eager to discover what he was up to and learn everything about him. Smiling to herself, she gently touched her lips with her fingers, thrilled to see how much Cion had changed over the years. Rachel couldn't help but gush over Cion as she reminisced about their past. He had been the standout among all the children she'd trained, mastering every weapon with exceptional skill. She marveled at how independent and confident he had become. Peering through the classroom window, Rachel saw Cion slouched in a chair, a smug grin on his face. Cion was chatting with his classmates about Yousef when he suddenly clasped his hands in a mock prayer position and began imitating Yousef's pleas for mercy. Rachel's eyes widened in surprise as she questioned whether this arrogant blonde boy was truly the Cion she once knew. The other boys watched with growing disappointment as Cion continued to boast, dismissing Yousef's strength. Suddenly, the boy behind Cion, clearly irritated, stood up and complained that Cion was being too noisy and disturbing his rest. Cion's jaw tightened as he turned to face the annoyed boy. Both boys rose to their feet, and Rachel, observing from the window, couldn't help but widen her eyes in astonishment. Both boys locked eyes, and Rachel wondered if this was a battle for hierarchy, reminiscent of the fights at the Dead Mansion. Those were struggles to establish dominance and strength. She found it amusing how Cion even tried to challenge her back then. Whenever Cion fought his peers, he always emerged as the strongest. However, as soon as the fight began, the larger boy delivered a single blow that knocked Cion to the ground, leaving him curled up and defeated. It was clear who the strongest was. Rachel was confused, her eyes twitching at the sight. Cion was getting kicked by the bigger boy, desperately trying to shield his face. Frustrated, Rachel bit her lip and resolved to continue with her disguise later inside the classroom. Rachel then proceeded to read aloud from a book, pretending to teach the class. As she did, she began to understand Cion's motive a bit more. She realized that he couldn't carelessly show off his strength if he was trying to hide his true identity. She turned slightly, locking her eyes on Cion, pondering whether he was still under the influence of the three principles. She knew she had to observe him more closely. Cion seemed to be concentrating as he scribbled something in his textbook. When he looked up and fixed his gaze on Rachel, she knew he was different. She recalled that back at the dead mansion, the good children weren't only strong but also intelligent. Cion was always the most outstanding child. She remembered how he was able to solve puzzles while the rest of his peers struggled. Rachel walked toward Cion, closing her eyes and placing a finger on her lips while holding a couple of textbooks in her other hand. She thought to herself that Cion might be able to hide his powers, but he couldn't conceal his brilliance. Opening her eyes, her lips curled into a smile. Cion should at least try to conceal his intelligence if he wants to blend in, especially when she is teaching. When Rachel glanced at his notebook, she noticed a childlike drawing of stick figures, depicting the moment he hit Yousef with the fire extinguisher, accompanied by the words, "This is when it gets rough." Looking at Cion's work, Rachel was left dumbfounded. Cion held two pens between his fingers, intently concentrating on his drawing. "What do you think you're doing? This is class," Rachel exclaimed, striking Cion on the head with the two books she was holding. After class, Rachel retreated to the staff bathroom, sitting on the toilet with her arms resting on her knees and her face buried in her hands. She was in disbelief over what had become of Cion. In frustration, she removed her disguise and looked up with a blank expression. It was hard for her to accept that her beloved Cion she once knew had turned into such an ordinary child. Hugging her knees with her feet drawn close, she chewed on her thumb, reflecting on the oddity of the situation. Despite his familiar appearance, she couldn't detect a trace of the elegance that once defined him. With her eyes closed and her hands pressed against her head in frustration, she recalled the drawing Cion had made in class. She questioned whether it could all be a coincidence. Refusing to believe that the immature child before her could be the Cion she knew, she struggled to reconcile the two. Standing up with a resolute expression, Rachel announced, "Change of plans. This is no longer just about protecting the three absolute principles." She pulled her hair into a tight ponytail and left the bathroom. Transforming her disguise into that of a high school girl with long brown hair and glasses, Rachel was determined to uncover the truth about whether this child was truly the Cion she once cherished. Cion paused at the traffic light, gripping the strap of his bag with one hand and rubbing his head where Rachel had struck him in class. He grumbled about the lingering pain, musing that teachers usually don't hit that hard. Meanwhile, Rachel, concealed in her disguise, stood a few feet away, watching him intently. Unaware of her presence, Cion continued to ponder the unusual severity of the teacher's strike. Rachel, now only inches away from Cion, observed him closely. She resolved that if this boy wasn't the real Cion, he would face severe consequences at her hands. Suddenly, a woman called out to Cion. He turned slightly and made eye contact with her. It was Hunho's mother, carrying 2 grocery bags. With a bright smile and a joyful expression, she was delighted to see Cion. She asked if he could help her carry the bags. Cion walked over to her at a relaxed pace, extending his hands to help carry the bags. Rachel observed closely, noting the change in his demeanor. As he assisted her, Hunho's mother invited him to join her for tteokbokki. Rachel kept a watchful eye from the corner, puzzled by the identity of the newcomer and the sudden shift in Cion's demeanor. Cion, laughing, accepted Hunho's mother's invitation to join her for a meal. At Hunho's shop, Cion eagerly devoured the food prepared by Hunho's mother. As she cooked rice, she turned slightly, closed her eyes, and smiled, gently advising Cion to eat more slowly. Meanwhile, Rachel sat beside him, staring blankly at the skewered meat she was holding. Rachel watched the mother closely, recalling Yousef's mention of her. Yousef was the one who had put her son into a coma. As Rachel held the skewered meat, she shifted her gaze to Cion, who was now eating slowly. She couldn't fathom what connection he had with Hunho's mother. Rachel continued to watch Cion, feeling increasingly disgusted by the sight of him. The longer she observed, the more her irritation grew. Rachel focused intently on Cion, grappling with whether he could truly be the Cion she knew despite the identical face. As she took a bite of the skewered meat, she let out a scream, causing both Cion and the elderly woman to turn and face her in alarm. Rachel's face turned red as she stuck out her tongue and waved her hand, claiming the meat was too spicy and asking for some water. Cion, still eating his meat with a fork, cast a curious glance at Rachel. The old woman closed her eyes and handed Rachel a bottle of water, remarking that she couldn't handle spicy food. Rachel, still sticking out her tongue and sweating, gratefully accepted the bottle. Meanwhile, Cion continued to eat his spicy food, observing the exchange between them. Rachel closed her eyes, sweat still streaming down her face, and took a gulp of water. She found spicy food torturous and wondered how anyone could enjoy it. In her mind, those who ate such fiery dishes must be crazy. Rachel brought her hand to her mouth, thinking that Koreans must have a high tolerance for spice. She mused that such fiery food should be considered poison, or even an assassination attempt. Cion, with a knowing smile, remarked that she should have eaten more slowly, teasing her for being so clumsy. Rachel fixed her gaze on Cion, her thumb pressed against her lips and veins bulging with visible irritation. The remark had clearly struck a nerve, and she seethed with the desire to kill him. She vowed silently to herself that she would make him pay. Rachel remembered the first time Cion tried spicy food. She had held his hand, her face etched with concern, as he tasted it for the first time. His reaction had mirrored her own, unable to handle the intense heat. Recalling Cion's low tolerance for spicy food, Rachel thought to herself that he must be struggling if he's still in Korea. After quenching her own discomfort with water, she glanced at Cion's hand. His fists were clenched and visibly shaking. The old woman beamed at Cion and asked how he liked the food. Cion closed his eyes and smiled, giving a thumbs up as he declared that it was delicious. Rachel, observing their interaction, could see through his lie and knew he wasn't being truthful. Rachel took another sip of water, wondering why Cion was so eager to eat everything the old woman served. He could have easily refused her food if he didn't want it. As she reflected on their interaction over the past 30 minutes, starting from when the old woman asked Cion to help with her bags, and he complied, to when she invited him to eat, and he accepted, Rachel's eyes widened. It became clear to her that Cion must view this old woman as a parental figure. The old woman asked Cion if he could help her carry some boxes. With a smile, he readily agreed to lift the heavy load. Rachel, watching this interaction, realized that Cion followed the old woman's every request without hesitation. Given his adherence to the 3 principles, this level of obedience seemed surprising even for him. Rachel observed that it was implausible for Cion to act so obediently without some form of command. The only plausible explanation was that someone had instructed him to target Byungwoo Construction, and the most likely candidate for this order was the old woman. According to the Dead Mansion's first principle, a parent's words are absolute. Rachel concluded that Cion must regard the old woman as a parental figure, which explained his compliance with her commands. With this realization, everything seemed to fall into place. Rachel handed the old woman some money for the food, and the old woman smiled, saying she would need a moment to find some change. As the old woman turned her back to Rachel, Rachel seized the moment to test her theory. With swift precision, she hurled a sharp stick at the woman, but Cion was quicker. He raised a fork to intercept the stick, preventing it from reaching the old woman. Cion leapt off the stool behind him, using his right hand to steady himself on the counter. With the fork still in his left hand, he lunged toward Rachel. She couldn't help but smile wickedly, her eyes widening and cheeks flushing red as Cion's hand edged closer to her mouth. The stool behind the old woman toppled, startling her. She spun around, only to find that both Rachel and Cion had disappeared. Notably, Rachel had left without taking her change. The Dead Mansion's third principle for good children states that if a parent's safety is threatened, one must disregard the principles and resolve the situation. Rachel smiled as she gripped the wooden skewer stick, preparing to take a jab at Cion. Rachel's eyes were locked on Cion as she aimed to stab him. Cion swiftly dropped his left shoulder, causing her to miss her mark, though her attack managed to leave a scratch on his cheek. Reacting quickly, Cion attempted to counter with a punch, but Rachel raised her arm just in time to block it from reaching her face. Cion and Rachel clashed head-on, their eyes locked in a fierce stare. Cion seized her wrist, halting her attack, and demanded, "How long are you planning to keep following me around?" Rachel's eyes widened, and a dark smile spread across her face as she realized this was indeed the real Cion she knew and cherished. She was thrilled to see him again after such a long time. Cion stared at her with a stern expression, still gripping her wrist. Rachel found it odd that he was following the old woman from the snack shop as if she were his parent. There was no way that a shabby snack shop owner could be a client of Dead Mansion. Cion looked surprised. He didn't know what she was talking about. He hadn't caused a big fuss and didn't expect her to find him so quickly. As he spoke with Rachel, she suddenly ducked, uninterested in further discussion. Planting one foot firmly on the ground, she grabbed Cion, twisted her body, lifted him into the air, and slammed him onto the floor. With a loud slam, Cion closed his eyes and gritted his teeth in pain. Rachel, now sitting on top of him, moved her hands towards his stomach and insisted he should return to the Dead Mansion. Touching his hair affectionately, Rachel leaned forward with a stern gaze and stated that many clients were waiting for him. Reflecting on his memories of the Dead Mansion, Cion recalled how he had outperformed his peers at every level. Back then, he was known as Cion Park. He also remembered a woman with her eyes hidden by black hair who gave him that name when he got hurt. Cion, now confused, wondered aloud why that particular memory had resurfaced. Rachel, still sitting on top of him, didn't understand what he was saying and asked him to repeat it. Regaining consciousness, Cion realized Rachel was sitting on him and swiftly headbutted her in the nose. Rachel screamed, closing her eyes in pain. She leaped off Cion, her right hand covering her mouth while her left hand was partially outstretched as she slid backward. Rachel stared menacingly, her hand and nose covered in blood. She pressed her thumb on the right side of her nostril and blew out the blood. She noted that Cion wasn't going to come back quietly. However, by the time she looked up, Cion was no longer there. Cion ran through the back alley, incredulous that the Dead Mansion would send Rachel to capture him. Visions of the black-haired woman resurfaced. He still didn't know who she was. With a steely gaze, he pressed forward. In Russia, dark clouds gathered above the Dead Mansion. The priest, visibly annoyed, was on the phone with Rachel. She informed him that she had lost sight of Cion, prompting the priest to question how she could have let that happen. Rachel rushed into the women's public restroom, pushing aside an elderly woman who was about to enter. She quickly locked herself in a cubicle, informing the priest that she had let her guard down for just a moment. She locked the door and hung her high school blazer on the hook before starting to unbutton her shirt. Still on the phone with the priest, she informed him that she had discovered who was controlling Cion. It was the old woman, connected to the three principles. As she tilted her head to the right, blood from the headbutt with Cion smeared across her nose. She removed her white school shirt, revealing her pale skin marked with scratches across her arms, chest, and shoulders. From what Rachel had observed, it appeared that Cion viewed the old woman as a parental figure. The priest set his phone on the table and put Rachel on speaker, propping his left elbow on the surface and resting his chin on his hand. He finally grasped that Cion was following the old woman's commands. He asked Rachel if it was even feasible for the old woman to intentionally manipulate the three principles. Rachel adjusted a new mask with her left hand and informed the priest that she needed further confirmation, though it didn't seem likely at the moment. The priest, maintaining a serious expression and still resting his hand on his chin, instructed Rachel to investigate the old woman first. As Rachel opened the toilet door, the elderly woman she had pushed aside shouted at her, insisting that she was in line first and that a young woman like Rachel shouldn't cut in. However, When the old woman turned to look at Rachel again, she realized that Rachel was no longer a young woman. Rachel, now in a gray coat and purple blouse, had traded her brunette hair for a short gray cut. Sporting sunglasses, she walked past the old woman, who could only stare back in stunned silence. The priest leaned back in his chair, resting his elbows on the chair arms and interlocking his fingers. He explained to Rachel that there were two methods to retrieve a good child from their parents. The first approach was to confront Hunho's mother and request that she stay away from Cion. Rachel, now disguised as an elderly woman, approached Hunho's mother, adjusting her sunglasses with one hand. She told the old woman that due to her frequent business trips, she hadn't been able to keep a close eye on Cion. With a fork in hand, she stabbed a piece of spicy meat and remarked that Cion couldn't handle spicy food. Hunho's mother looked down, unable to meet Rachel's gaze, clearly unaware that Cion couldn't handle spicy food. Rachel smiled, watching the old woman with a calculating expression. The first method to reclaim a good child is to instill enough guilt in the guardian that they willingly relinquish their claim. Rachel was determined to make this old woman feel the weight of her control over Cion. The old woman, still staring at the ground with her hands tightly clutching her apron, seemed overwhelmed. Rachel stood up and declared that Cion would heed her commands, emphasizing that the old woman must take responsibility as an adult. Placing a firm hand on the woman's shoulder, Rachel urged her to instruct Cion that if he ever appeared again, she should command him to return to the dead mansion. As Rachel walked away, the old woman paused, her silence indicating that she had understood Rachel's message. However, she soon clenched her hands into fists and resolutely declared that she would not comply. Rachel, taken aback by the old woman's refusal to release Cion, turned to face her. The old woman continued, explaining that Rachel's frequent business trips meant she was unaware of Cion's current situation. Without making eye contact, she asked Rachel if she had truly observed Cion's face or his clothing, and whether she understood the nature of his school life. Rachel turned away, her smile fading. The old woman observed that Cion often wore disheveled clothes and had a dirty face. Whenever she inquired about it, he would smile and say he had simply fallen. Initially, she accepted this explanation, believing it to be typical behavior for a growing boy. The old woman began to cry, recalling how her own son used to offer the same excuses whenever he came home with messy clothes and unkempt hair. She couldn't bear to see Cion end up like that, so she found herself taking care of him whenever she could, despite not realizing how deeply she had become involved. The old woman clenched her fist with determination and declared that Cion needed a guardian because she couldn't bear to see him end up like her own son. She insisted that if Rachel was too busy, she would be more than willing to take on the responsibility of watching over him. Rachel turned to the old woman, locking eyes with her and shaking her head slightly in disagreement. She firmly stated that she could not accept someone like her to care for Cion. The old woman, bowing her head, regretfully informed Rachel that she couldn't comply with her earlier request. Rachel, her frustration rising, gritted her teeth and clenched her fist. After leaving Hunho's residence, Rachel headed to a nearby back alley. She contacted the priest to report that her initial attempt had failed. It turned out that the old woman was more stubborn than anticipated and refused to relinquish her claim over Cion. As Rachel changed out of her clothes and disposed of them in a nearby bin, she relayed the details of the encounter to the priest. The priest replied, acknowledging that the situation was unfortunate, but emphasizing the need to resolve it discreetly if possible. He instructed Rachel to move on to the second phase of their plan. With a determined and steely expression, Rachel adjusted her t-shirt, preparing for the next step. Rachel tore off her t-shirt and explained that the second phase involves retrieving a good child from their parents by returning them to the dead mansion in the event of the parents' death. She confirmed to the priest that the new target was now the old woman. Rachel walked into the convenience store, wearing a black cap and jacket. She positioned herself a few feet away from the old woman, who was picking up a bag of onions, completely unaware of her presence. Rachel gripped a detonator in her hand, which had two buttons, one red and one black. With her thumb hovering over the red button, she glared at the old woman, silently cursing her for taking Cion away from her. Rachel pressed the red button, causing the device in the back of the store to explode. The blast rocked the rear of the store, and civilians turned in horror as the explosion unfolded. The store's sprinklers activated, and Hunho's mother turned in shock. Behind her, Rachel stood with her cap shadowing her left eye, her right eye fixed menacingly on the old woman. Holding a gun, Rachel was poised to shoot, determined not to let the old woman take on the role of Cion's guardian. Rachel fired the gun, but Cion leaped into the path of the bullet, intercepting it with a frying pan. The pan deflected the shot away from the old woman, protecting her from harm. Rachel's wicked smile widened as she watched Cion deflect the bullet. The impact caused him to stumble back a few feet. Staring at the frying pan, he realized he had seen a similar scenario in a video game and decided to try it out. To his surprise, it actually worked. Dropping the frying pan, Cion approached Rachel with a fierce gaze, his right hand clenched into a fist. While he had anticipated that she would come after the old woman, he hadn't expected the bombs and the guns. This was excessive. Rachel's eyes locked onto Cion's as she declared that he should not interfere with her plans. She was determined to free him from the old woman's influence. The old woman began to cough, closing her eyes and covering her mouth. Her coughing drew Cion's attention away from Rachel to check on her. Meanwhile, with a deadly glare, Rachel aimed her gun at the old woman's back once more. Cion leaped backward, attempting to knock over the heavy shelves to create a barrier between himself and Rachel. Seeing this, Rachel darted to her left to avoid the falling shelves, gritting her teeth as she raised her pistol closer to her face. Rachel peeked out to check if the old woman was still there, but to her surprise, it was Cion. He kicked her hand, causing her to release the gun. She then pulled out a short knife strapped behind her back. Though she wanted to take Cion back to the dead mansion without harming him, her eyes locked onto Cion, and she knew she would have to hurt him. Rachel moved swiftly, slashing at his belly. Blood splattered to the ground, or so it seemed. In reality, it was just the tomato ketchup tin he was holding that got punctured in the process. With a fierce look, he knew he couldn't let Rachel leave unharmed. Cion tossed the ketchup tin away, causing her to lose her balance and lose her weapon. He quickly tried to smash her with his knee, but she ducked, questioning whether Cion could really take her down, given her extensive training. Rachel kicked his feet out from under him, sending him crashing into the shelves. Fighting should be a means to an end, she thought, considering this a supplementary lesson for him. Rachel crouched down in front of him, pulling out another knife from behind her back. With a piercing gaze, she asked him what the purpose of this fight was. Meanwhile, Hunho's mother was trying to make sense of the chaos when she noticed a small child on the floor, crying desperately. Amid all the commotion, he was sobbing for his mom. The old woman rushed over, asking if he was hurt. The boy, his face buried in his hands, said he couldn't find his mom. Turning to face the old woman with tears in his eyes, he explained he didn't know where she was. The little boy asked the old woman if she could help him find his mother, all the while clutching a knife in his left hand. Cion, slightly puzzled, questioned what she meant by the purpose of this fight. Ignoring him, she swung her knife at him. He rolled to his right, narrowly avoiding her attack. He jumped away, creating distance between himself and Rachel. They stared at each other with intense concentration, while Rachel readied her knife to strike again. She lunged at him, swiftly aiming her knife for a strike. However, Cion twisted his body, leaning back slightly and raising his hands to deflect the blow. He held Rachel's wrist, asked what her plan was. With unwavering focus, she replied that her goal was to free him from the old woman. As she pressed the blade closer to Sion's face, he tried to fend her off while glancing at the old woman to his left. Rachel, switching the knife to her other hand, warned him not to get distracted in the middle of a fight. She swung her knife at him once more, this time managing to leave a shallow cut on his cheek as he narrowly dodged the strike. He stepped back, realizing that fighting Rachel with just his hands was too much. He picked up a couple of tin cans and threw them in her direction. Rachel deftly dodged with the knife, declaring that as long as she dealt with the old woman, Cion would soon be back under the control of the dead mansion. After all, to them, they were merely labeled as products. She lunges at him, locking eyes with him as she brandishes a knife in her left hand, declaring it's time for them to return to the dead mansion. But Cion steps back, and with a swift motion of his right hand, hurls a bag of flour at her. With a swift slash of her knife, Rachel sliced the flour bag in half, sending a cloud of flour billowing around her, obscuring her vision like a thick fog. Cion was no longer in front of her. His presence vanished. She quickly covered her mouth with one hand to avoid inhaling the flour. As she strained to see through the haze, a sharp object suddenly came into focus before her. It was Cion, his expression serious as he extended his arm, holding a pair of scissors. He aimed to strike her, but Rachel swiftly dodged to the right. The attack narrowly missed, grazing her cheek and slicing a few strands of her blonde hair. Rachel leaped back, holding her short knife defensively in front of her. Cion, now armed with a pair of scissors in each hand, lunged at her again, but missed his target. Their battle continued as Cion swung his scissors with force, only for Rachel to swiftly duck beneath the attack, her knife still poised and ready. She laughed, gripping the knife tightly, her eyes locked on his. "This is the real Cion I've been waiting for," she said with a grin. Just as she was about to strike, her attack was suddenly halted. She glanced down to see Sion's scissors locked tightly around her knife, stopping her in her tracks. She realized that his grip on the scissors was unwavering. With a swift motion, he ducked beneath her, reminding her of how she had once labeled Cion and the others as mere products. Rachel's eyes widened in shock. Seizing the moment, he gripped her arm, lifting her into the air before slamming her into the shopping cart. Gritting her teeth, Rachel glared back at Cion. But Cion, unfazed, continued, saying that his so-called family at the dead mansion was waiting for him. With a cold stare, he questioned her, asking who would dare call their family products. He then kicked the shopping cart, sending it hurtling toward the others. Rachel's eyes widened in shock as the cart collided with the rest, crashing into them with force. He then wedged the shopping cart into the others, trapping Rachel inside. As he walked away, one hand in his pocket and the other partially out, he remarked that Rachel was just another product for the dead mansion. Rachel, trapped in the cart, screamed after him. The little boy, clutching a knife in his left hand, asked the old woman if she could help him find his mother. Concerned, she asked the boy if he was all right. The old woman asked where his parents were and, placing a hand on his shoulder, turned away to search for them. Seizing the opportunity, the boy drew the knife, intending to finish off the old woman. Suddenly, Cion appeared, rushing toward the old woman. Nearly losing his balance, he asked if she was all right. Hunho's mother, noticing his disheveled clothes, inquired why he wasn't at school and wondered if he had been hurt again. The boy quickly shifted his gaze to Cion, furtively tucking his knife behind his back. Upon seeing Sion's face, the boy instantly recognized him as the legend of the dead mansion, codenamed Cion Park. He realized that if Cion was here, it meant Rachel had failed to keep him away from the old woman. After ensuring the old woman was all right, Cion turned to the boy, and asked who he was. The old woman then explained that the boy had lost his mother and suggested they take him away from the area. Cion crouched down beside the boy, resting his elbow on his knee, and asked if the boy knew his parents' phone number. The boy, with tears streaming down his cheeks, looked up at Cion, taken aback by the question. The boy looked down, avoiding his gaze, and replied that he didn't know his parents' phone number. He then considered that confronting him would be too risky at the moment, so he decided to focus on targeting the old woman instead. The boy picked himself up, stretching out his hands, and ran toward the old woman, tears in his eyes as he pleaded for her help in finding his mother. Cion, with a blank expression, noted that the boy had completely ignored him and directed his attention solely to the old woman. The boy thought he could exploit the old woman's motherly instincts to get closer to her. However, Cion placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, stopping him from reaching her. He then lifted the boy, cradling him like a baby, and with a playful smile suggested he shouldn't cry anymore. Cion's expression shifted to one of seriousness as he leaned in and whispered in the boy's ear that he should have learned by now that naive-looking kids are often despised. With a menacing gesture, Cion pointed his hand, shaped like a gun, at the boy's neck. He told the boy that he needed to have a conversation with the director and asked if the boy had the direct line, noting that he had lost it a long time ago. The boy, visibly shaken, gripped his knife tightly. The boy replied that he didn't understand what Cion was talking about. In response, Cion swiftly struck the boy's neck, knocking him unconscious. As the knife dropped from the boy's hand, Cion remarked that young boys shouldn't be handling such weapons. The knife clattered to the ground, startling the old woman. She turned to Cion, asking if he had heard anything. Stepping over the knife, Cion smiled and replied that he hadn't heard a thing. Noticing that the boy had fallen asleep, the old woman commented on it, and Cion responded that he must have been very tired. As they left the store, the firefighters attended to the injured. The old woman wondered where the boy's parents might be. Noticing that the boy had a phone on him, Cion suggested he could make a call to find them. In the dead mansion, the phone rang, waking the director from his bed. Rubbing his forehead, he wondered who could be calling at such an early hour. He draped his robe over his shoulders, and with one hand leaning on his desk, answered the call. The caller was Cion, who greeted the director. Hearing Cion's voice, the director's eyes widened and a smile spread across his face, clearly pleased to hear from him. Despite his happiness, he was puzzled about why Cion was calling this number. Cion, however, brushed off the director's confusion and sarcastically remarked that the director had sent him a huge present. With the boy still unconscious, Cion told the director that he was foolish to think sending Rachel and the boy to capture him would be easy. The director scowled, questioning how Rachel and the boy, Eugene, could have lost to Cion. This blow to his pride stung deeply. Cion, undeterred, remarked that no matter how many people the director sent after him, the outcome would always be the same. He challenged the director to keep trying. The director, lifting his head and looking up, speculated that Cion had merely fled. He questioned Cion, wondering if he planned to confront the dead mansion directly. Sitting inside Hunho's shop, Cion responded to the director, suggesting that if the parents' safety was at risk, they should disregard the principal and focus on resolving the situation. With a serious expression, Cion continued speaking to the director on the phone. He stated that, according to the third principle, he would treat the dead mansion as a threat and take decisive action to resolve the situation. The director fell to his knees, a menacing smile on his face. Assuming a prayer position, he clutched the phone with both hands and looked up, thanking the Lord for blessing him with the purest and most beautiful child he had ever seen. He marveled at Cion's unwavering commitment to the three principles. Still holding the phone close, the director agreed to Cion's demands with one condition. Eugene must be returned to the dead mansion before they would cease pursuing the old woman. Cion, standing by the shop door and gazing outside, responded that Rachel could come to collect the boy after an hour. The director rested his forehead on the phone, closed his eyes, and smiled in disbelief at Cion's purity. As his robe slipped from his shoulders, he hoped for a reunion with Cion, whom he considered a true treasure. Cion tapped Eugene on the head, waking him up. The boy quickly jumped up and reached behind his back for his knife. However, Cion closed his eyes and placed a hand on his hip, calmly stating that the boy needn't bother searching for the knife. It had been taken away long ago. Placing a plate of food on the table, Cion demanded that the boy sit quietly and eat. He observed that Eugene had probably not eaten anything. Eugene glanced at the plate, questioning who would want to eat such food. Moments later, after the food was quickly devoured, the boy's smile disappeared. As Cion and Eugene walked down the grimy alley, Cion glanced at the boy and asked if he liked the food. Eugene closed his eyes and replied that it wasn't good at all. With a smug smile, Cion placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, not believing his claim, given how Eugene had been devouring the food just moments earlier. With his arm around the boy, Cion looked up and saw Rachel standing at the top of the stairs. She fixed her intense gaze on them, her left hand behind her and her right hand clenched into a fist. With a commanding tone, she called out to Eugene, demanding that he come to her. Fearful, Eugene complied and walked toward Rachel. As he did, Cion called out to him, extending his hand with a bag of food and suggesting he take it with him. Cion smiled as he lifted the bag of food, noting that Eugene seemed to like it. Rachel shifted her gaze towards Cion, commenting that he appeared too relaxed and reminding him that she still hadn't given up on him. As she turned her back on Cion and walked away with the boy, Rachel remarked that she would visit him soon. Watching them leave, Cion called out to Rachel, reminding her that Eugene is at an age where he should be eating plenty of food. As Cion turned to walk away, Rachel commented that things would have been much simpler if Eugene had taken care of the old woman. Eugene, unable to meet Rachel's gaze, looked down and apologized for his mistake. As Cion walked away, he overheard Rachel mentioning that Eugene would be disposed of upon returning to the dead mansion, causing him to pause. She continued, remarking that they should have eliminated useless children long ago. Eugene stood frozen, unable to utter a word. Trembling as he held Rachel's hand, Eugene apologized once more. However, Cion turned around, his eyes obscured by his blonde hair, and called out to the boy. With a smile, he held out the bag of food and asked one last time if the food really tasted good. The boy turned, tears streaming down his cheeks, and confirmed that the food was indeed good. Walking toward Rachel and the boy, Cion remarked that Hunho's place had really good food. Rachel slightly turned her head, her eyes hidden beneath her cap. With a smile, Cion then asked the boy if he wanted to come back with him to Hunho's shop. The ownership rights of the dead mansion's well-behaved children belong to the buyers, their parents. However, if the parents die, ownership reverts back to the dead mansion. Eugene sat on a bench, his hands resting on his knees. An unfamiliar woman approached him, holding an expensive purse. She informed him that from today, she would be his mother. He looked back at her and simply replied, "Okay." When a child fails to protect their new parent, they are readopted and sent to another family. This cycle continues until they succeed. Eugene was the only child who had been readopted multiple times. Eugene walked a few steps behind the director, who, with his hands clasped behind his back, asked how many times it had been already. He held up 4 fingers and said it was the 4th time. The director, however, reprimanded him, saying it was a rhetorical question. The director turned to face Eugene, looking down at him and remarking that he could continue to profit by repeatedly sending him to new families. Crouching down, the director placed a hand on Eugene's shoulder and told him that he had failed to protect his parents 4 times already. He emphasized that this was the greatest disgrace in the history of the Dead Mansion. The director warned that if this continues, he would have no choice but to dispose of him. Eugene's eyes widened in horror at the words. The director, partially rising with one hand on his knee and the other still on Eugene's shoulder, looked at him through the shadow of his glasses. He asked if Eugene knew what happens to children who are disposed of, as gravestones loomed in the background. He stressed that Eugene must become more useful. Out of the corner of his eye, Eugene glanced down at the countless gravestones behind them. The director, now standing and looking down at Eugene with a serious expression, informed him that he was being given an opportunity. He needed to go to Korea and assist Rachel in retrieving Cion. If Eugene didn't want to be disposed of, he would have to prove his worth. In the present moment, Rachel looked down at Eugene and informed him that he would be disposed of immediately. He had failed his mission once again, and this was why the Dead Mansion got rid of useless children from the start. Still holding Rachel's hand, Eugene looked up and muttered, "Disposed?" Fear filled his eyes as he realized he couldn't let that happen. He had to prove his worth. Desperately, he asked Rachel for one more chance, just one more opportunity to make things right. Rachel glanced down at Eugene with a serious expression and repeated, "A chance?" Unable to meet her gaze, Eugene looked down and apologized. A few feet away, Cion called out to the boy. With a smile, Cion stood with one hand in his pocket and the other holding out a bag of food, asking Eugene one last time if the meal wasn't tasty. Rachel closed her eyes and smiled, then whispered to the boy that she would give him one final chance. Eugene glanced back at Cion. Opening her eyes with a menacing smile, Rachel demanded that Eugene kill Cion's parent, the old woman. As Cion placed the bag of food down, Eugene watched with a tear in his eye, knowing this was his last chance. Tears streamed down his cheeks as Eugene told Cion that the food was actually delicious, but deep down, he knew he had to kill the old woman. Cion smiled and fixed his gaze on Rachel, flexing his wrist in preparation for the fight. She turned slightly, smiling as she met his stare, aware that he still saw her as a threat. But she wondered if the 3rd principle should still apply. Cion approached Rachel and the boy, as Rachel placed her hands on the boy's shoulder. She reminded Cion of the deal he had made with the director, return Eugene to them, and they would leave the old woman alone. Rachel's cap shaded her right eye, but with the other, she locked eyes with Cion. With one hand on his hip and the other partially extended, Cion smirked at them and said that, while he had agreed with the director, Eugene mentioned the food was delicious. This made Eugene tense up. Cion added that Eugene had been a regular customer for a while now, so he couldn't help it. Rachel, understanding his point of view, leaned in slightly toward Eugene's ear. Cion, with his hand still on his waist, watched them, looking puzzled. With her eyes hidden beneath her cap, Rachel kept her hands on Eugene's shoulders and, with a smirk, told him to go with Cion, saying this was his last chance. Standing tall, Rachel locked eyes with Cion and told him the deal was off. She would go after the old woman again. Gripping the boy's wrist, Cion responded that she could do as she pleased. Eugene held Cion's hand and looked up at him as Cion repeatedly assured Rachel that he would do everything in his power to stop her. The scene shifts to Eugene and Cion in the old woman's shop. Seated at a table covered with various plates of food, Cion rested his left hand on the chair and looked at the boy, asking why he was there. The old woman, puzzled, asked what Cion meant by why. Smiling, she brought a plate of food to their table, reminding him that he had promised to look after the boy for a day. However, Cion looked down, gritting his teeth. Cion, holding knives and forks in his hands, looked up at the old woman and explained that they didn't want to take advantage of her hospitality. However, Hunho's mother reassured him, saying it was fine. She doubted whether Cion and the boy could even cook properly on their own, and added that she was happy to care for them. Otherwise, she'd just get bored, so this arrangement was good for her as well. Holding another bowl of hot food, she smiled and remarked how fascinating it was to think that Eugene was a friend of Cion's mother. Nervously, Cion partially covered his face with his hand and glanced at the boy. The old woman suggested that Cion might as well stay over since no one was at home. Cion, raising his hand slightly, responded that it wasn't necessary. The boy then interrupted, thanking the old woman and asking if they could be excused. Eugene stared intently, thinking to himself that he couldn't miss this opportunity. As she handed a bowl of rice to the boy, she asked for his name. The boy responded, "My name is Eugene." Cion ruffled his hair and turned his gaze away, thinking that this was really too much. As he looked around, he realized this was the first time he had ever entered Hunho's house. Cion glanced around, taking in every detail, the windows, the wet sneakers, until a closed door caught his attention. He asked her if that was Hunho's room. She looked at the door and confirmed that it was, then asked why he wanted to know. Without looking at the old woman, he asked if he could go in, speaking as if in a trance. Cion opened the door to Hunho's room, finding the lights off. As he stepped inside, he saw that it was just an ordinary room, the kind you'd see in dramas or movies. It reflected the usual everyday life, filled with normal dreams, efforts, and a typical happy family. Perhaps it was because Cion had longed for those things so much that he never got to experience them. An ordinary, normal family like the one Hunho had. Hunho should have been in this room, enjoying the simple, ordinary moments that brought happiness. As he held the picture of Hunho and his mother, Cion knew he shouldn't have just stood by. Eugene wiped his mouth with a cloth and thanked the old woman for the meal, thinking to himself that now, with Cion away, this was his chance. The boy remarked that the omelet was the best food he'd ever had. She smiled and gently corrected him, saying it wasn't an omelet but a rolled egg. Eugene mentioned to the old woman that he had a few questions for her. She smiled and asked what he wanted to know. Eugene placed his hands behind his back and asked her if she had any other family besides Hunho, such as a husband. Gently touching her hand, she pondered how to explain Hunho's father to a young boy. With a smile, she decided to say that the heavens truly needed him, and unfortunately, she had to let him go. Looking down, Eugene replied that Hunho's father had become a family member in heaven. Clasping her hands together, she said that was a lovely way to put it. Eugene went on to say that her son couldn't become part of a family anywhere, which surprised the old woman. He added that a weak loser, a useless child, can't become anyone's family. The old woman, shocked, asked the boy what he was talking about. Eugene, still looking down, replied that a family is where you constantly prove your worth and demonstrate to each member that you're valuable. If you don't, you're just a burden consuming resources. Slamming her hand on the table, she exclaimed that this is not how a family should operate. Eugene looked up at the old woman and asked how a family should operate. Before she could respond, Cion grabbed the boy from behind, lifting him off the chair. With his eyes closed and a smile, he asked if Eugene was finished eating. Gently swinging Eugene away from the old woman, Cion asked if they could sleep in the living room. However, she insisted that Hunho's room was empty and that they should sleep there. Cion politely declined, saying that the sofa would be fine for him and suggested that Eugene sleep on the floor. As night fell over Hunho's flat, Eugene lay awake, pouting. Cion slept soundly on the sofa beside him, and Eugene was surprised that Cion had actually made him sleep on the floor. He got up and looked ahead, noticing that Hunho's room was slightly open with the lights on. Gently pushing the door open, he peeked inside and saw the old woman resting her head on the desk, her fingers lightly touching the picture frame. He found the old woman strange, yearning for a child he considered useless and smiling kindly at strangers like him, even though he hadn't proven anything. He remembered the director's words, that he needed to become someone useful, that a useless child could never be part of a family. But the old woman seemed to believe otherwise. Eugene pulled the gun from where it was tucked under his shirt. A trembling hand grips the cold metal of a gun, the barrel aimed at Hunho's mother, who is peacefully asleep in a desk chair, her fingers gently resting on a framed photo. The dim light casts long shadows across the room, highlighting the internal battle raging within Eugene. His eyes are hard, filled with a desperate determination. He tightens his hold on the weapon, driven by a deep, aching need to prove himself, to become the family member he has longed to be, someone indispensable, someone needed. Yet the weight of his resolve is heavy, teetering on the edge of doubt. The door is quietly shut, as Cion suddenly materializes beside Eugene. His presence is as cold and unyielding as the steel walls around them, and his piercing gaze bores into Eugene, cutting through the tension like a blade. With a voice devoid of warmth, Cion asks, "Is this the decision you've come to, Eugene?" The words hang in the air, heavy with unspoken consequences. Eugene's grip on the gun tightens, his knuckles whitening as doubt creeps into his mind. His heart races, pounding in his chest as his hands begin to tremble. Desperation clouds his judgment, and in a burst of panic, he swings the gun towards Cion, his voice cracking as he yells, "Don't resist, Cion!" He squeezes the trigger, expecting the explosive recoil that would signal the end of their standoff, but instead, there's nothing. Silence. The gun remains inert, a cold, lifeless piece of metal in his shaking hands. Confusion flashes across Eugene's face. A slow, knowing smile creeps onto Cion's lips as he watches Eugene's growing horror. With deliberate calm, Cion raises his hand, revealing a handful of bullets gleaming in his palm. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" he asks, his tone tinged with a mix of disappointment and amusement. "While you were sleeping, I took the liberty of emptying your magazine." Eugene's eyes widen in shock as the realization dawns on him. His mind races, trying to piece together how Cion could have known, how he could have been so careless. Cion walks slowly, his expression hardening as he steps closer, his presence looming over Eugene like a shadow. "You're far too relaxed, Eugene," he chides, his voice now edged with steel. "You should have noticed the weight difference when you picked up the gun. If you had, you might have realized it was empty." Eugene, his frustration mounting as the gun fails him, reaches into his coat and swiftly pulls out a knife. The blade catches the dim light, gleaming menacingly as he tightens his grip. With a snarl of rage, he lunges at Cion, his movements wild and desperate. But Cion, ever calm and composed, sidesteps the attack with practiced ease. His hand snaps out, seizing Eugene's knife-wielding wrist in a firm grip, and in one fluid motion, he uses Eugene's own momentum against him, shoving him hard into the closed door behind them. Eugene stumbles, the impact rattling the door. He tries to steady himself, his free hand fumbling for the door handle, but in his frantic state, he loses his balance and crashes through the door, tumbling into the adjacent room. Cion follows closely, his eyes flicking quickly to assess the situation. The room they've entered is dimly lit, with Hunho's mother asleep in a chair, her breathing deep and even, completely unaware of the violent struggle unfolding just a few feet away. As Eugene scrambles to his feet, his eyes blazing with fury, dart towards Cion, ready to continue the fight. The tension is thick in the air, each man poised for the next move. But Cion, recognizing the danger of their surroundings, urgently hisses, "Eugene, calm down. Be quiet. Don't wake her." His voice is low but firm, pleading with Eugene to consider the innocent woman sleeping peacefully amidst their chaos. For a brief moment, Eugene hesitates, his gaze flickering towards Hunho's mother. But instead of calming him, the sight of her only reignites his rage. His mind twists with dark thoughts, and in a sudden, terrifying shift, he redirects his fury towards her. He turns sharply, knife in hand, and charges at the defenseless woman, his intentions clear. Cion reacts instantly, his instincts kicking in as he snatches a tie hanging from a nearby clothes hook. With quick precision, he loops it around Eugene's leg just as he begins to move. With a sharp tug, Cion pulls the tie taut, yanking Eugene off balance and sending him crashing to the floor. The fall is hard, but Eugene is undeterred. In one swift motion, he slices through the tie with his knife, the fabric giving way easily under the sharp blade. Eugene rises, his eyes burning with a mix of anger and frustration. He glares at Cion, the knife still clenched in his hand, and reaches into his back pocket, pulling out another blade. The gleaming metal reflects the intensity in his eyes as he prepares for another attack, his entire body coiled like a spring, ready to strike. Cion, seeing the escalation, knows that words alone won't reach Eugene now. He steadies himself, gripping the remaining piece of the tie tightly, his muscles tensed and ready. The room is thick with tension as they face off, both knowing that the next few moments could determine everything. Hunho's mother continues to sleep soundly, oblivious to the deadly battle that's brewing around her, unaware of how close danger has come. Eugene propels himself off the bed with explosive energy, soaring high above Cion, and launching an aggressive assault with both knives aimed directly at him. Cion, however, skillfully deflects both blades, using his tie as an improvised shield, and counters by forcefully hurling Eugene back. Undeterred, Eugene quickly regains his stance and faces Cion again, his eyes blazing with intensity. He lunges at Cion in a frantic, uncontrolled manner, shouting for Cion not to hold back and to engage him with full seriousness. Cion, maintaining a calm and detached demeanor, deftly evades Eugene's wild attack by moving to his left. With a smooth, practiced motion, he disarms Eugene by snatching one of the knives from his grasp, his expression remaining impassive as he acknowledges the need to fight Eugene with full commitment. In a moment of desperation, Eugene throws his remaining knife at Hunho's mother, who is still asleep, hoping to create a distraction. Cion, reacting with lightning speed, intercepts the airborne blade with a decisive strike, halting its trajectory in midair. In a seamless maneuver, he appears next to Eugene, swiftly tripping his foot and causing him to crash towards the ground. At the very last moment, Cion catches the front of Eugene's shirt, ensuring that he does not hit the floor, thus avoiding any disturbance to Hunho's mother's rest. Cion gazes coldly at Eugene and instructs him to get back up, asserting that their confrontation has barely begun and that Eugene must be prepared for the true challenge ahead. Eugene, fearful, grapples with the overwhelming difference in strength between himself and Cion, the legendary figure of the dead mansion. Cion taunts him again, menacingly urging Eugene to get up and continue the fight. Suddenly, Cion is struck on the head by a tightly rolled magazine, visibly hurt. Hunho's mother stands over them, furious, demanding an explanation for the commotion. Cion quickly tries to downplay the situation, insisting they're not fighting, but Hunho's mother is unconvinced. Eugene, knife in hand, sees an opportunity while Cion is distracted, but a chilling look from Cion freezes him in place, making him realize he's no match for him at the moment. Then, Cion's expression softens into a laugh as he wraps an arm around Eugene, insisting they aren't fighting. Eugene twirls his knife, playing along, saying it's all just a trick to calm Hunho's mother. Skeptical, she warns Eugene not to fight with his family, still doubting their claim that they were merely training. Eugene, stunned, lowers his head, questioning aloud whether he truly belongs in this family. Cion, hands on his hips, reassures him, stating that since they share meals and sleep under the same roof, they are indeed family. Hunho's mother gently pats Eugene on the head, offering comfort as he grapples with the shame of his actions. The doorbell rings, capturing the attention of everyone in the house. Hunho's mother opens the door to find an unfamiliar blonde-haired girl standing there. The girl, dressed in a school uniform with a red shoulder bag and glasses, bows politely and introduces herself with a smile as Mary, claiming to be Eugene's sister. Beaming, she thanks Hunho's mother for taking care of Eugene the previous night. As Cion approaches the door, Hunho's mother introduces the girl to him, repeating that she's Eugene's sister. Cion, however, looks sarcastically amused at this supposed sister. Stepping outside, Cion confronts the teenager, demanding to know her true intentions. The girl, Mary, drops her innocent act, her expression twisting into a sinister smile as she reveals her purpose. She's here to take Eugene home, offering the safety of Hunho's mother in exchange. Cion moves in close, his eyes cold and unyielding, and asks Mary who ordered Eugene to kill. Mary whispers that it was an arbitrary decision by Rachel, assuring Cion that he shouldn't worry since he stopped Eugene before any harm was done. However, Cion notices a knife strapped to the bottom of Mary's red bag and another to her right leg. He sternly tells her to get rid of them. Mary laughs, praising Cion for his sharp observation and reassures him that there's nothing to worry about, so long as he fully complies. Cion feigns a look of fear while maintaining steely eyes, and then calmly inquires what will happen if he refuses to comply. Eugene interrupts the moment, spotting Mary and exclaiming why she's only come now before they embrace. However, during the hug, Mary whispers that it seems he has failed and that the director will be greatly disappointed. Unfazed, Eugene tells Mary that she has ruined his plan, explaining that he was taking his time to integrate himself into the family. He knocks her arms away, frustrated. Mary questions if he's making excuses, but Eugene dismisses her, saying she's being absurd and that this mission is far from simple with the dead mansion's legend, Cion, guarding it. He remarks that Cion is ugly, stupid, and looks like a monkey, but admits that having fought him, Cion is a formidable opponent. Cion attempts to send Hunho's mother away, but she insists on staying to say goodbye. Mary, meanwhile, agrees with Eugene's assessment, especially his comments about Cion's face, which irritates Cion. He again urges Hunho's mother to go back inside. Mary finally concedes that she has disrupted Eugene's plan. She stands up with a smile, extending her hand, and tells Eugene he'll have another mission soon, so it's time to leave. Eugene takes her hand, and Mary bids farewell to Hunho's mother and Cion before turning to go, leaving Eugene looking deeply saddened. As they walk away hand in hand, Hunho's mother rushes to the door, shouting goodbye to Eugene and promising to make him an omelet next time he visits. Eugene glances back with a smile, quietly promising that he definitely will return. Hunho's mother then tells Cion that she'll cook something delicious if he brings Eugene around again. Cion, with a dark look in his eyes, assures her that he definitely will bring him back. The scene changes to a bright sunny day at the entrance to Yonhai Middle School, surrounded by greenery. The school features a brick gate with a green metal fence and a plaque on the gatepost with the name of the school. Behind the gate, there are trees with lush green foliage that partially obscure the view of the school building in the background. The building is modern, with large windows reflecting the bright daylight. The sky above is clear with some light clouds, contributing to a peaceful and serene atmosphere. Inside the principal's office, a tense discussion unfolds between the principal and Hunho's mother. The principal, with a somber expression, apologizes for the delays in addressing the incident with the school violence committee. He explains that the parents of the perpetrators have agreed to offer compensation and that the students responsible will face suspension. Hunho's mother, her face heavy with sadness, reluctantly agrees, understanding the difficult position, but still feeling the weight of the situation. The principal then slides a file across the desk toward her, containing the names and pictures of the students involved. As Hunho's mother begins to flip through the file, her expression abruptly shifts to one of shock and disbelief. Her eyes widen as she stares at one of the pictures, unable to comprehend what she is seeing. She quickly looks up at the principal, her voice trembling as she asks, "Why is this picture here?" She repeats the question, her tone growing more insistent and confused as she holds up the photograph. The image shows a young Cion, sporting spiky hair and dressed in a school uniform blazer. The principal appears caught off guard by her reaction and hesitates before responding, unsure of how to address her sudden alarm. A Gothic church-like building characterized by a tall tower topped with a large cross. The architecture is ornate, with detailed windows and pointed arches, giving the structure a historical and ominous appearance. The sky is overcast with dark clouds, adding to the moody and atmospheric setting. The windows of the building are illuminated, suggesting that there are lights on inside, which contrasts with the otherwise dark and brooding exterior. A white-haired priest stands tall, facing an ornate window with his hands clasped behind his back. A phone rests on an open book atop a plinth behind him. He questions the person on the phone about how this situation could have occurred. Rachel, disheveled and unkempt, is shown sitting in a chair, holding a gun in her right hand and a phone to her left ear. Her white shirt is unbuttoned and slipping off her right shoulder, paired with loose black trousers and a black bodice-like top with bare feet. She apologizes to the priest, addressing him as director. Behind her, Eugene sits as Rachel informs the director that she sent him to kill the old woman. But, looking at Eugene with disdain, she calls him a useless child who failed to carry out even a single order correctly. The director angrily shouts through the phone at Rachel, telling her that she completely missed the point of his question. Confused, Rachel asks what he means, as she sits in a sparse but modern gray room with a single plant on the table in front of her. The director, lifting the ornate gold cross from his chest, reminds her that his order was to retrieve Eugene and leave the old woman alone. His fingers, adorned with large, ornate rings and stylized tattoos, tighten around the cross as he yells that Rachel instead ordered Eugene to kill the old woman. Rachel, looking concerned for the first time, tries to explain, but the director cuts her off, questioning whether she is the one incapable of following orders. The director, with a cold and malevolent expression, grips the cross tightly in his right hand. His pince-nez glasses gleam, and an intricate gold watch with Roman numerals on his wrist catches the light. Rachel interrupts again, pleading that she acted for Cion's retrieval, while Mary, behind her, stares into her pink phone, surrounded by others scattered across the table. The director, pressing the cross to his forehead, sternly reminds Rachel that he holds promises sacred, and that in the eyes of the divine, only faith and trust matter. His unhinged smile reveals rows of gleaming silver and gold teeth, emphasizing his ostentatious appearance as he declares that faith and trust are paramount, and everything else is heresy. He warns Rachel to remember the consequences of acting impulsively and recalls the 3 absolute rules of the Dead Mansion: orders, director, promises. Rachel finishes the prayer, kneeling on her chair with an amen, as a large gold cross hangs on the wall nearby. Tentatively, she asks the director if he is giving up on retrieving Cion. He reveals that he already has a plan in motion, with Mary working on it. Mary is shown frantically typing on multiple phones, a wry smile on her face, as she enacts the plan. The director reassures Rachel that there are many ways to retrieve Cion without harming the old woman. The phones display a picture of Cion headlocking with Yousef as Mary continues to type rapidly, executing the director's strategy. Cion yawning, looking exhausted, with his bag slung over his left shoulder. He notices his classmates casting odd glances at him out of the corner of their eyes, which leaves him puzzled. He turns to the boy at the desk next to him and asks why the class is so quiet, wondering if there's an exam today, but the boy appears nervous and stays silent. Cion, now annoyed, wonders why no one is talking to him. From behind, Cion hears one of the 3 tattooed, hulking classmates ask if it's real, showing him a phone. Confused, Cion looks at the screen, which displays an image Mary had sent earlier to various phones, a picture of Cion headlocking Yousef. Cion examines the photo curiously, wondering where this crudely photoshopped image came from, and asks the hulking boy where he got it. The 3 boys exchange glances before suddenly bowing to Cion, admitting they were wrong all along, believing the rumor that Cion had been bullying Yousef, a rumor that has now spread throughout the school. Distressed and bewildered by this obviously false news, Cion protests. The hulking boy then shows another picture, this time of Cion standing in front of shirtless, tattooed gangsters. Cion tries to argue that the images are fake, but the boy reveals the final rumor, that Cion ordered Yousef to crush the Hunho kid. Overwhelmed by the false accusations, Cion stands up to protest, but his classmates turn away, unwilling to listen. As Cion continues to protest, one of the hulking boys shoves a classmate aside and praises Cion for being extremely cool. When the pushed boy tries to reclaim his seat, the hulking bully threatens him, raising a hand to strike, but Cion intervenes, grasping the bully's hand. Cion diffuses the situation by laughing and inviting the bully outside to explain everything. As Cion walks away, his classmates watch uneasily, while Cion glances back with sad eyes. Casually, Cion asks the hulking boys if they smoke, making it clear he doesn't. The bully, puzzled by the question, follows. As Cion and the three bullies leave the room, the remaining classmates, who always thought Cion wasn't a bad guy, begin to reconsider their judgment. Cion and the three bullies are now in an alleyway, where they reveal that the images were shared in their group chat earlier that day by someone who quickly exited the chat afterward. Cion grew suspicious, thinking this might be a trick orchestrated by the dead mansion, but he's unsure of the motive. He lets out an annoyed sigh, frustrated that he's been exposed once again when all he wanted was a quiet life. He wonders if any other school would accept him for a transfer at this point. With a hardened expression, Cion starts to walk away, telling the bullies that he has no interest in getting involved in such childish games. He's already dealing with the adult world. His tone carries a subtle but clear warning as he advises the three hulking boys to keep this information within their group. The boys, thrilled at the idea of being part of a crew with Cion, eagerly agree, while Cion hides a smile behind his hand. As this unfolds, an old lady walking across the road catches sight of Cion and is visibly shocked to see him. Flashback to the principal's office, where the elderly woman insists that the image of the perpetrator cannot be Cion. She argues that the principal must be mistaken because Cion is a friend of Hunho. The principal, fumbling with his phone, shows her a photoshopped image of Cion headlocking another student and claims that Cion was also friends with Yousef. He expresses his concern to the old lady that Cion might be the instigator. Shocked, she learns from the principal that the school has been unable to contact Cion's parents and that he appears to have been poorly raised. The principal, sweating profusely, warns her that children like Cion can easily be led astray and that he doesn't trust him. As Cion descends a set of concrete stairs, he reflects on his hope that the hulking boys will keep their promise to keep the rumors to themselves. He chuckles at their surprising naivety, amused by how easily he deceived them. Out of the corner of his eye, he notices a faint silhouette and calls out, questioning if it is Mary. The shadow steps into view, revealing Mary with a smile, who remarks that she thought she was well hidden, but clearly misjudged the situation. She's dressed in her school uniform, complemented by a long white sweater and high boots. Cion reveals that it was the scent of coffee that gave her away, his irritation evident as he reminds her that this happened in front of Hunho's house as well. Mary, still smiling, mentions she's disappointed that he could identify her scent so quickly. Ignoring her comment, Cion's expression grows more annoyed as he directly asks why she is making things more complicated for him. Mary bursts into laughter and playfully lifts her hair from her forehead, mimicking Cion's spiky hairstyle and parroting his earlier line to the bullies about not wanting to get involved in their childish games. Her imitation embarrasses Cion, who looks visibly annoyed at being overheard. Mary then admits that she was the source of the rumors and taunts Cion about his new status as the top bully at school. As Cion attempts to defend himself, Mary interrupts by placing her hand over her mouth and laughing heartily. She asks him if he enjoys seeing his classmates look at him with disdain, betrayal, or with cold, harsh glares. Mary's laughter takes on a malicious edge as she revels in the success of her scheme. Cion then questions Mary about the photos, asking if she was behind them as well. Mary confirms her involvement and eagerly seeks his opinion on their quality. Cion grudgingly agrees that the photos were well made, but describes them as crude. Mary blushes with pleasure at the compliment, but explains that the crudeness was due to limited time and resources. Cion, however, dismisses her explanation, accusing her of making excuses. Cion's expression shifts to one of disdain as he mocks Mary for her excuses. Without changing her serene smile, Mary swiftly opens her handbag and reaches inside. She fires several shots at Cion, who narrowly avoids them. The bullets strike the bag where he was standing only moments before, and a look of panic crosses his face as he dives for cover. Cion shouts at Mary, incredulous that she would resort to gunfire so casually, while Mary continues to shoot, her bullets chipping away at the edge of the building where Cion is hiding. His voice is filled with alarm as he questions the recklessness of her actions, wondering what would happen if he were to be hit because the orders should have been to retrieve him, not kill him. Mary maintains an angelic facade that belies her malevolent intent, responding to Cion's concern with a nonchalant tone. She remarks that she expects him to be able to dodge the bullets, and for the first time, her expression morphs into one of extreme malice as she venomously declares it would be better if he were discarded altogether. Mary eventually drops the handbag, now with a gaping hole in the front, and retrieves the gun, advancing towards the building where Cion is hiding. As she approaches the corner, Cion seizes the opportunity to snatch the gun from her grasp. Mary, however, maintains a vice-like grip on the gun and refuses to let go, even as Cion slams her against the wall. When she tries to knee him in retaliation, Cion successfully blocks the move. Undeterred, Mary draws a dagger from her leg holster and readies herself to stab Cion. She swipes at him with the blade, but Cion blocks her attack and traps her arm with his elbow, maintaining a composed demeanor throughout. He coolly questions whether the abandoned mansion is truly finished as he disarms her and forces her to the ground. Standing over her with a frosty expression, Cion says that he guesses she didn't expect something like this from him. Despite her position on the ground, Mary is unfazed and smiles up at Cion, revealing that she has not been incapacitated and still has plans of her own. Suddenly, a loud voice cuts through the chaos. The old lady, having just arrived, sees Cion during a violent struggle with Mary and gasps in shock. Her face contorts with pain and disbelief as she exclaims as to what on earth Cion is doing. She implores him, her voice trembling, to stop the aggression, clearly distraught by the scene unfolding before her. Mary, watching the old lady's reaction, smiles with a sense of satisfaction, pleased that her plan to tarnish Cion's reputation is succeeding. The old lady's distress grows as she witnesses the confrontation, her eyes wide with horror. In a voice filled with anguish, she screams at Cion, demanding to know if it was really him who hurt her son. Her question echoes with a mix of accusation and desperation, adding a layer of urgency to the already tense situation. Cion vehemently denies the accusation, but before he can defend himself, Mary bursts into tears and rushes towards the old lady, crying out for help. With tears streaming down her face, Mary embraces the old lady, who immediately checks to make sure Mary isn't hurt. Just as Cion starts to explain the truth, the old lady cuts him off, sternly shouting at him to stay still and be quiet. His face falls, and he stands frozen in place, deeply hurt by the command from the woman he considers a mother. Mary, still crying, tells the old lady that when she took Eugene home, she noticed bruises all over his body. According to Mary, Eugene confided that it was Cion who inflicted those injuries. The old lady recalls the times she saw Cion and Eugene training together, and the principal's warning that Cion couldn't be trusted. Continuing her story, Mary claims she confronted Cion, simply asking him what happened to Eugene. But instead of answering, Cion allegedly attacked her without warning. Horrified, the old lady steps protectively in front of Mary, shielding her from Cion, who she now believes is not the boy she thought she knew. Behind her, Mary hides a satisfied smile, knowing her plan is working perfectly. The dead mansion, bound by their promise not to harm the old lady, has found a way to destroy her trust in Cion without laying a hand on her. As Cion tries once more to tell his side of the story, the old lady suddenly slaps him hard across the face. The force of the slap and the hatred in her eyes stun Cion. With tears streaming down her face, the old lady denounces Cion, disowning him from their family and telling him never to return to their house. Internally, Cion pleads desperately, unable to bear these heartbreaking words. Mary, now smiling in triumph, knows the first phase of her plan is complete. The sound of black high-heeled boots echoes as someone new enters the scene. It is Rachel, disguised as an older, tall woman with gray hair, a haughty demeanor, and a beauty spot next to her left lip. She wears a large gray overcoat over a crimson dress, her long, meticulously manicured nails glinting in the light. Adjusting her large black sunglasses, Rachel confronts Cion, asking him what trouble he has caused this time. She coldly informs him that they will settle this matter when they return home. Cion, devastated, looks up in shock and dread, recognizing her presence as another twist of fate against him. We cut to a close-up of the director's gleaming metal teeth, a mix of gold, bronze, and silver grills. He cackles maniacally, shouting his congratulations to Mary for a job well done, his voice booming through the phone placed on a plinth in front of him. Suddenly, he falls to his knees, gazing up at an exquisite painting of a heavenly scene that hangs on the wall. The painting overlooks a large table draped with a white tablecloth, set with glasses of red wine and plates of food. Two candelabras with lit candles cast a warm glow over the scene. Raising his hands to the sky, the director prays fervently, thanking Mary for her success. Meanwhile, we see Mary on the other end of the line, kicking her feet happily as she listens to the director, the backdrop of a skyscraper-filled urban night scene behind her. The director continues to lavish praise on her, calling the plan worthy of the dead mansion's top strategist. With a pleased smile, Mary graciously thanks him, twirling her hair as she listens to his compliments. He declares that the plan's success means Cion is finally coming home to the dead mansion. The call concludes with the director summoning Mary to return at once. Her expression shifts to one of seriousness as she agrees, ending the conversation. In front of Mary, we see Rachel and Cion seated at a table, with Cion voraciously eating. He stuffs his face with pizza in his right hand while twirling spicy cup ramen on a fork in his left, a tub of blue ice cream placed in the middle of the table. Rachel, wearing a mostly buttoned-up white shirt that reveals the black string of her undershirt, pours soup over her meal. She casually asks Cion if he's enjoying the food, noting that their appetites seem quite similar. Cion quickly rebukes her, stating that he's only eating because he's been ordered to, and that he strongly dislikes her odd food preferences, especially the mint and pineapple on the pizza. Rachel, with a wry smile, tells Cion to make sure he finishes it all. Inwardly, she's pleased that he's complying with her orders, feeling a sense of satisfaction that the dead mansion has regained control over him. Meanwhile, Cion, tears streaming down his face and lips swollen from the spicy ramen, desperately begs for some milk to ease the heat. A mechanical wheelchair rolls into the room where Rachel and Cion are eating, and a voice that does not hide its happiness comments that they've finally caught him. The man in the wheelchair is revealed to be Yousef's father, who asks how they're enjoying the apartment he provided. He is heavily injured, wearing a neck brace, with his right leg in a cast, and bandages covering his face and both arms. Rachel responds that the apartment isn't bad, to which Yousef's father snorts, noting that it's the most expensive penthouse in the area. Cion, with his mouth pursed from the heat of the food he's trying to soothe with ice cream, feels a spark of recognition towards Yousef's father. With a demented look in his eyes, Yousef's father says he's willing to pay any price if it means Cion is captured. Startled by a spark of recognition, Cion leaps from his chair and asks if Yousef's father is cosplaying, jokingly trying to guess who's behind the bandages. This enrages Yousef's father, who begins shaking with fury, causing blood to trickle from his nose as he seethes in anger. Before the situation can escalate, Rachel steps in, pulling out a compact submachine gun and threatening Yousef's father, reminding him that Cion is now under the protection of the dead mansion. In exchange, they've agreed not to harm Yousef's son. Yousef's father, stunned by the reminder, quickly reassures Rachel that he hasn't forgotten their deal, insisting that it's just business. He wipes the blood from his nose with a blue handkerchief, grumbling that Cion isn't the only one on his list for vengeance. Rachel casually walks over to him, dismissively telling him he's free to handle his other targets however he pleases. She then returns to the table, sitting down and fixing Cion with a malicious, almost devilish gaze, while casually waving the gun in her hand. She coldly reminds him that anything Yousef's father does, even killing the old lady, has nothing to do with the dead mansion. This revelation leaves Cion stunned. Furious, he demands to know what Rachel means by that. The old lady, hard at work chopping sushi in the restaurant, when a customer demands a portion of spicy rice cakes and a serving of fritters. As she prepares the order, her mind drifts to a memory of Cion, happily gorging himself on the food, excited to eat all the delicious dishes. The customer interrupts her thoughts, asking for another portion of what she's cutting. With a heavy heart, the old lady turns to prepare the food, her mind still on Cion. Her thoughts shift to the principal's revelation of Cion bullying another student, and she closes her eyes, forcing herself to believe that Cion is a bad kid who hurt her son, Hunho. Lost in these painful memories, the knife slips from her hand, cutting into her thumb and drawing blood. The old lady cries out, dropping the knife and clutching her thumb to stem the flow of blood. The concerned customer looks over, asking if she's okay as he notices the blood pouring from the wound. The old lady, tears streaming down her face, insists that she's fine, assuring him that the bleeding will stop. However, the tears reveal the deep emotional pain she's struggling to contain. Distracted by her injury, the old lady doesn't notice as the customer quietly draws a knife from his pocket, gripping it so tightly that the veins in his hand bulge. Meanwhile, Yousef's father, with a twisted expression, reassures Rachel not to worry about the aftermath, revealing that he has sent a business partner to handle the situation. The so-called business partner, posing as a customer, raises the blade over the old lady's head, ready to strike as she answers a phone call. Suddenly, her eyes light up at the news she hears, and without a second thought, she dashes out of the restaurant, telling the customer he can eat as much as he wants and not to worry about the bill. Completely unaware of how close she came to being assassinated, she runs out, leaving the would-be attacker stunned. He shouts after her, asking where she could be going in such a hurry, but without looking back, she excitedly exclaims that her son Hunho is awake. Hunho lies in a hospital bed, his eyes finally open, but appearing incredibly fatigued. An oxygen mask is strapped to his face, and he looks drained. A doctor leans over him, gently asking if he's awake, while nurses move frantically in the background, recognizing that Hunho has come out of his coma. Hunho attempts to speak, but struggles to make a sound. The doctor quickly stops him, advising him to take it easy, reassuring him that speaking will be difficult at first, and he shouldn't push himself. The doctor then begins to question him, asking if he knows where he is, and if he can remember anything from before he slipped into the coma. Hunho strains to recall his memories, managing to piece together fragments of an argument with his mother. He remembers her standing there, hands clasped, looking sorrowful as she apologized for something that wasn't her fault. Overcome with guilt, he realizes he needs to apologize. Distressed, he reaches out and calls for his mother, his voice trembling as he tearfully pleads to see her. As if by a miracle, his mother's voice suddenly calls out from the doorway of the hospital room. She rushes to him, still in disbelief that her son is awake. The nurses and doctors try to stop her, noticing her bleeding hand, which she hasn't even tended to in her rush. But Hunho, undeterred, reaches out to hold her hand and immediately begins to apologize, tears streaming down his face as he admits his fault. His mother, overwhelmed with emotion, leans over the hospital bed, clutching her son's hand tightly, sobbing loudly with relief and joy. Meanwhile, at the edge of the hospital room door, the assassin, who had been watching, pulls out his phone and calls Yousef's father, asking if he should eliminate both Hunho and his mother now that they're together. Yousef's father, with a wide, unsettling smile, denies the request, declaring that the plan has now changed. Rachel, consumed by rage, hurls a table across the room. Her lip is bloody from biting it in fury, her face contorted into a twisted, demonic expression as she screams, clutching a gun in her hand. She howls in fury, demanding how anyone could dare to kidnap her, Cion. Cion, bound and gagged, struggling against two hulking henchmen holding him back. In front of him sits Yousef's father, still on the phone with the assassin, his eyes bulging with a crazed smile on his face. Yousef's father instructs the assassin to spare the old lady and Hunho, revealing his intention to kill them in front of Cion, who can do nothing but watch, helpless and seething with anger. The White Tiger Job Center stands as a solitary gray building with an industrial vibe, characterized by its concrete or stone exterior. A basic air conditioning unit is mounted to the right side of the window. Inside, Rachel, now sporting a fresh scar on her forehead, sits apathetically, leaning forward. Beside her, Eugene, visibly nervous, sits with his back perfectly straight, hands resting on his knees. Rachel wears her hair down, paired with a black turtleneck, a gray blazer, and black mid-calf boots. They wait for someone who finally arrives, carrying 3 steaming cups of coffee. With a smile, the woman apologizes for being late and asks if they've been waiting long. Rachel, leaning back with an irritated expression, remarks that the secretary was slow and questions whether the coffee was really worth the wait. The secretary, a woman with long brown hair, glasses, and earrings, dressed in a smart business shirt and pencil skirt, also holds a clipboard. She apologizes again, explaining that she was tallying the market and Byungwoo Construction's HQ, which took longer because of the significant mess Rachel had caused. Handing Eugene a cup of hot chocolate, she advises him to drink it slowly, to which he politely thanks her. Rachel takes her coffee and dismissively comments that the secretary is being paid to handle such tasks and should act more professionally. The secretary sits down, scoffing at Rachel's remark, and questions the professionalism of causing chaos without considering the consequences, laughing as she covers her mouth with her left hand. Rachel, visibly annoyed, glances at her coffee cup and asks why she received a paper cup while the secretary sips from an ornate teacup. The secretary, still smiling, suggests Rachel review the resolved reports and mentions that Byungwoo Construction stated they wouldn't need any compensation, subtly inquiring how Rachel managed that. Rachel casually responds that it was nothing special, implying she had something both parties needed, highlighting that this is how a true professional handles business. Eugene, gripping his mug tightly, wishes he had stayed home. The secretary's voice seems to drift away, almost as if it's coming from a distance, as she remarks that the mess involving Byungwoo Constructions is no longer connected to their organization. Rachel, however, is fixated on her paper cup, a faint blush creeping up on her cheeks. She seems lost in thought, her eyes unfocused, as she absent-mindedly agrees with the secretary's statement. The secretary, noticing Rachel's distraction, contradicts herself, advising caution instead. This finally pulls Rachel's attention away from her cup, her gaze lifting slowly to meet the secretary's, her eyes still glazed over and unfocused. Eugene, who has been quietly sipping his hot chocolate, notices Rachel's demeanor and glances at her with mild concern. The secretary, her tone sharpens slightly, takes another sip from her ornate teacup, continuing her train of thought. She remarks that true professionals should engage with other professionals, not with delinquents, her smile darkening as her face is partially veiled by shadows. There's a sinister edge to her words as she questions whether Byungwoo Constructions can truly be trusted and whether they are worthy of being considered real business partners. This pointed comment jolts Rachel from her reverie, her dazed expression giving way to one of sudden alertness. Eugene watches the exchange closely, sensing the tension between the two women. Rachel, now more aware, narrows her eyes slightly, the earlier blush fading as she processes the secretary's implications. The air in the room grows thick with unspoken challenges, and Rachel's posture straightens, her fingers tightening around the paper cup as she tries to regain her composure. Rachel, consumed by rage, hurls a table across the room. Her lip is bloody from biting it in fury, her face contorted into a twisted, demonic expression as she screams, clutching a gun in her hand. She howls in fury, demanding how anyone could dare to kidnap her, Cion. A nondescript gray van speeds down the highway, its engine roaring as it barrels through the traffic. Inside, Cion, bound and gagged, struggles futilely against the grip of 2 massive henchmen restraining him. Across from him sits Yousef's father, his head tilted slightly in surprise as he observes Cion. With a mocking tone, he remarks how pathetic Cion seems without orders to follow, almost as if he's nothing more than a puppet. Yousef's father wheels himself closer, revealing a third henchman sitting to the side, his arms in a sling. With a sudden yank, Yousef's father grabs a fistful of Cion's hair, pulling him forward and sneers, asking if he is now just a dog of the dead mansion, unable to act without their commands. Scratching his chin thoughtfully with his free hand, Yousef's father muses aloud, wondering if Cion's current state is the result of brainwashing. As he turns his wheelchair away from Cion, a sinister smile spreads across his face. He chuckles darkly, sharing that he's come up with an amusing idea. He'll buy Cion himself and order him to kill the old woman at the restaurant. The thought sends him into a fit of maniacal laughter, echoing through the van's interior. Behind him, Cion thrashes violently against his restraints, rage burning fiercely in his eyes. Noticing Cion's expression, Yousef's father wheels back over, his laughter fading as he leans in close. He coldly chastises Cion, telling him not to make such faces, as the real pain hasn't even begun. With a chilling whisper, he promises to tear the old lady and her son apart right in front of Cion's eyes, forcing him to watch helplessly, powerless to act without orders. As blood trickles from his nose once more, Yousef's father casually wipes it away with a handkerchief, his gaze devoid of any emotion. Cion's face contorts with an intense fury, his eyes filled with a terrifying anger as he listens to the vile plan. Yousef's father meets Cion's gaze with an empty stare and reminds him coldly that he had warned him. He will kill them all. In the hospital room where Hunho has just woken from his coma, the soft glow of the overhead light casts a warm hue on the scene. Hunho's mother, seated beside his bed, skillfully peels an apple with a sharp knife. Her hands work with practiced ease, but the cut on her thumb catches Hunho's eye. Concerned, he asks how she hurt herself. She brushes off his worry with a gentle smile, insisting it's nothing serious. Despite her reassurance, Hunho struggles to sit up, his leg encased in a thick green cast, as he insists on getting bandages for her wound himself. His mother stops him, urging him to rest, promising she'll get the bandages herself. Hunho, determined, mentions that the doctor advised him to increase his mobility for a faster recovery, but his mother, with a bittersweet smile, insists on taking care of it. Her smile fades into a moment of sad reflection as she notes how stubborn Hunho is, just like his father. She exits the room, leaving behind the comforting atmosphere of the hospital room for the eerie stillness of the hallway outside. The lights seem dimmer than before, and the corridor is unnervingly quiet, devoid of any nurses or doctors. Her calls for assistance echo unanswered in the darkness. Suddenly, from the shadows, a henchman with glasses, one of Yousef's father's men, emerges silently behind her. Before she can react, he delivers a swift, brutal strike to the back of her neck, and she crumples to the ground, unconscious. The sound of her body hitting the floor is a dull thud, resonating through the empty hallway. The henchman glances back at the room, his lips curling into a sinister smile as he meets Cion's furious gaze. Cion watches helplessly from the bed, his body rigid with anger, yet unable to act. The thug sneers, mocking Cion's inability to do anything without orders, before disappearing into the shadows. The sliding door to Hunho's room creaks open, and Hunho, still smiling, assumes it's his mother returning. He cheerfully asks what took her so long, but his smile fades as Yousef's father steps into the room instead. The man's presence is ominous, his figure framed by the doorway. With a cold, unsettling smile, Yousef's father apologizes for the delay as he casually wipes a fresh trickle of blood from his nose. He then introduces himself, his tone dripping with malice, as Yousef's father. As he speaks, a group of henchmen silently files into the room, their imposing figures surrounding the bed. Yousef's father's gaze shifts to Hunho's injured leg, still bound in its cast. He comments with feigned concern on the injury, noting that it must have been painful. He taps the cast lightly, but there's a carelessness in his gesture that makes it clear he doesn't care if it causes Hunho more pain. He then coldly remarks that he had instructed Yousef to finish the job properly, not leave it half done, and now he has more work to do. His smile widens, though he hides it poorly as he wipes his nose again, the blood still flowing. The henchmen close in around Hunho, their shadows swallowing the light in the room. Hunho, once filled with hope at his mother's return, now stares in terror, realizing the grim fate that may await him. A shiny, high-heeled boot striking the ground with force. Rachel, who agrees with the secretary's earlier assessment, she should never have trusted those bastards. Dressed in a sleek black catsuit layered under a long black trench coat, she exudes lethal elegance. In her hands, she grips a long grappling gun, which she aims with precision and fires above a hospital window. The grappling hook secures itself, and as the mechanism tightens, Rachel smirks, preparing for her daring entry. Inside the hospital, a henchman hears a sudden noise and turns toward the window, but before he can react, Rachel is already zipping toward him at lightning speed, her smile widening with anticipation. She crashes through the window, shattering the glass and catching the henchman off guard. With a fierce scream, she demands to know how they dared betray the dead mansion and take her Cion. Her face contorts with a mix of rage and disgust as she surveys the room. Yousef's father, seated calmly in his wheelchair, greets her arrival with a sinister smile, seemingly unfazed by her fury. Rachel wastes no time in attacking. With fluid motion, she slashes at the calf of a nearby henchman, her blade slicing through flesh as she grins with satisfaction. Another henchman lunges at her with a knife, but she easily dodges his attack and retaliates, her blade cutting deep into his side. As a third henchman grabs her from behind, he prematurely celebrates his capture, but Rachel's smile only grows wider. She taunts him by telling him that if he likes hugging her so much, he should try this before slamming her head backward into his face, crushing his nose with a sickening crunch. As he releases her in agony, she grabs his collar and hurls him into another henchman with effortless strength. Displaying incredible athleticism, Rachel follows up by kicking both men through the broken window, sending them plummeting to the ground below. Seeing his men fall so easily, Yousef's father becomes visibly concerned. Desperate to regain control, he orders one of the remaining henchmen to grab Hunho and continue with the plan. The henchman quickly scoops Hunho over his shoulder and rushes toward the exit, but before they can escape, Rachel bursts through the door, her bloodied blade still in hand. She stabs another henchman in the stomach with a swift motion, yanking the blade out with a flourish. Turning her attention to Yousef's father, she demands to know where Cion is, her voice dripping with venom. As Yousef's father begins to wheel himself out of the room, the glasses-wearing henchman steps in Rachel's path. With a menacing smile, he snaps his fingers, summoning a dozen more henchmen who had been lurking in the shadows. They emerge, brandishing an assortment of weapons, blades, machetes, hatchets, and knives, surrounding Rachel in a tight circle. A chainsaw revs up, its menacing roar echoing through the halls. Rachel surveys the situation, her eyes narrowing as she notes how outnumbered she is. She mutters that they are like roaches, her voice dripping with disdain. Calmly, Rachel lifts her hands above her head, tossing her blade aside. The henchmen think they've won, but she remains unafraid, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous edge. She coolly says that they've brought some interesting tools, before flipping back the tails of her long coat to reveal 2 compact submachine guns holstered at her sides, and that maybe it's time she used hers. In one fluid motion, she draws the guns and unleashes a hail of bullets, mowing down the henchmen in a deadly spray. Some fall immediately, clutching bullet wounds in their legs and torsos, while others narrowly avoid the onslaught. Among the survivors is the chainsaw-wielding henchman who remains untouched. As the smoke clears, Rachel stands tall, unbothered by the carnage around her. The glasses-wearing henchman, however, isn't so easily intimidated. He laughs mockingly, asking if she really wants to play with guns. Cion, still bound, watches in horror as the henchman's cast suddenly shifts, revealing a hidden gun inside. A shot rings out, and Rachel flinches as blood blooms on her thigh, a fresh wound marring her leg. She glares at the henchman, fury blazing in her eyes. The henchman taunts her, warning that his next shot will be aimed at her head. Before he can make good on his threat, Cion, seething with rage, removes the bit between his teeth and challenges the henchman. He demands to know if they are planning to kill Rachel. The henchman barely has time to respond before Cion lunges at him, breaking free of his captors with surprising speed. In an instant, Cion knocks out the two henchmen holding him and delivers a powerful punch to the glasses-wearing henchman, leaving him stunned. The henchman, shocked at Sion's sudden movement, stammers that there were no new orders given. Cion, his eyes cold and filled with deadly intent, reminds him icily that he is still under the dead mansion's control. Cion declares that the henchman threatened a trainer of the dead mansion, and that makes him a threat. The henchman's expression shifts from surprise to fear as he realizes that Cion has been reactivated. Rachel, still reeling from her injury, is stunned to see Cion moving so quickly and decisively. As Cion prepares to face the remaining henchmen, who are now armed with knives and machetes, he locks eyes with them, his anger and determination evident in every tense muscle. The standoff intensifies, setting the stage for an explosive confrontation. Cion, his voice cold and commanding, declares that by threatening a trainer of the dead mansion, the henchman has violated the third principle, making him an immediate threat. Just as he finishes, a henchman attempts a sneak attack from behind, but Sion's reflexes are too quick. He grabs the assailant's wrist with one hand, and with the other, delivers a crushing punch to the face, sending a tooth flying. Cion smirks and remarks that he should have held on tighter as the henchman stumbles back, clutching his now bleeding mouth, whining about the lost tooth. Cion sneers at the henchman's pathetic whimpering, taunting him for acting like a baby. With a swift follow-up, Cion lands another blow, knocking the henchman to the ground. The impact leaves the man unconscious, his body sprawled out cold on the floor. Meanwhile, the other henchman, momentarily distracted by Sion's unexpected activation, gave Rachel a crucial opening. As she watches the chaos unfold, a thought crosses her mind. If Cion isn't receiving orders from anyone, could it be that he's fighting to protect her? The idea brings a blush to her cheeks, and for a moment, she gazes at Cion with a mix of admiration and affection. As a bat-wielding henchman takes a wild swing at Cion, he ducks effortlessly, causing the bat to strike another henchman square in the jaw. Rachel's thoughts linger on Sion's possible feelings for her, making her heart race as she watches him move with deadly precision. Cion quickly dispatches another henchman with a brutal elbow strike, but the danger isn't over yet. A scream alerts him to a pipe-wielding attacker charging from behind. Cion nimbly evades by leaping onto the reception desk, the wild swing missing him by inches. In a flash, Cion counters with a powerful upkick that connects with the attacker's jaw, sending him reeling. Cion, now fully in control of the situation, searches for a weapon to finish off his adversaries. His eyes lock onto a table behind the desk, littered with syringes. Without hesitation, he rolls over the desk, grabs a handful of syringes, and turns to face the oncoming henchmen. They mistakenly think he's retreating and rush after him, but their confidence quickly turns to terror. Cion, moving with astonishing speed, drives one syringe into a henchman's eye, the man's scream of agony echoing through the hall. As the man writhes in pain, Cion mockingly removes the syringe caps with his teeth, spitting them out with a menacing grin. Now armed with 4 syringes in each hand, he flexes, ready to unleash hell on the remaining enemies. With a swift, acrobatic leap from the table, Cion hurls the syringes in a fanning motion, each one finding its mark in the flesh of his opponents. One of the henchmen, pulling a syringe from his arm, lets out a vengeful scream, but Cion is already upon him, grabbing his face and slamming it hard into the ground. Surrounding Cion are several henchmen still standing, brandishing knives and other deadly weapons, their faces twisted in fear and anger. Suddenly, the chainsaw-wielding henchman roars for everyone to get out of the way. He revs the motor, the terrifying sound filling the room, and steps forward, confident that his brutal weapon will end this fight. He glances back, momentarily taken aback by the sight, as the chainsaw-wielding maniac laughs, revving the motor louder in a show of intimidation. Cion takes off running, the relentless rev of the chainsaw close behind, creating a cacophony of noise that echoes through the corridors. As he turns a corner, Cion spots a red gurney, formulating a plan in an instant. He tries to reason with the chainsaw wielder, but his words fall on deaf ears. The henchman rounds the corner, ordering Cion to stop, but instead, Cion kicks the gurney with all his might. The gurney slams into the henchman, who crashes onto it face first, the chainsaw's deadly tip narrowly missing Cion and clipping only a few strands of his hair. Cion exhales slowly, every nerve on edge from the close call. With a devilish smile, Cion quickly straps the henchman's hand to the gurney, the chainsaw now precariously overhanging the side, leaving the henchman immobilized. Cion taunts him, asking if he really wanted to use this chainsaw, pushing the gurney back around the corner toward the other henchman. The strapped henchman screams in terror, begging Cion to stop, but his cries are drowned out by the horrified looks on the faces of the henchmen in the chainsaw's path. Cion's laughter fills the hallway, dark and manic, as he pushes the gurney faster, the strapped henchman screams growing more frantic. The chainsaw now slick with gore, splutters and chokes, its once mighty roar reduced to a pathetic sputter. Cion momentarily frowns, concerned, as he affectionately asks if the chainsaw, which he whimsically calls Pochita, is okay. The blood-soaked gurney finally comes to a stop, the henchman strapped to it looking delirious and on the brink of passing out from the sheer horror of the ordeal. Blood and gore cover the floor around Cion, who stands over the defeated henchman with a thunderous expression. With a syringe pressed menacingly to the henchman's neck, Cion growls that he still has questions for him. Where have they taken Hunho's mother? His voice is low, dangerous, leaving no doubt that the henchman's answer could very well determine whether he lives or dies. Rachel approaches from behind, blood seeping from the wound in her left thigh. Her voice is sharp as she remarks that it looks like he's finished. Cion, standing amidst a sea of bloodied bodies, turns to her with a sly smile, saying that he hasn't finished, he was just getting started, but they've all run off. His tone hardens as he remembers Hunho's mother being taken and mentions that they need to go after them, with his voice filled with grim determination. Rachel, still confused, furrows her brow, reloading her gun with practiced precision. She adds, her voice steely, that she is not here to rescue anyone else. She is here for him, property of the dead mansion. As the adrenaline from the battle starts to wear off, Rachel relaxes slightly, her eyes softening as she looks at Cion. She asks, her voice almost vulnerable now that the danger has passed if he used his powers to protect her. She suggests they should head back to the mansion, but Cion has other plans. He notices a roll of bandages on the ground, picks it up, and holds it out to Rachel with a teasing smile. Asking if she wasn't missing something, his tone gentle yet playful. Kneeling in front of Rachel, Cion begins to unwind the bandages. He murmurs, affirming her earlier words that she was right. He used his powers for her. His hands work carefully, tenderly wrapping the bandage around Rachel's injured leg. The care in his actions doesn't go unnoticed by Rachel, who feels a flush of warmth at his attention. As he finishes, Cion bites off the bandage with his teeth and ties it securely. His eyes darken as he says they can't let someone who threatened her get away. They'll find them and make them pay. They'll learn what happens when they cross a dead mansion instructor. Rachel feels her heart skip a beat at Cion's fierce loyalty, her cheeks flushing as she covers her mouth with her hand, touched by the tenderness in his words despite their violent undertone. Cion, blushing slightly himself, quickly looks away, trying to mask his emotions. But he can't help but glance back at her from the corner of his eye, wondering if he successfully tricked her in convincing her to follow him in the hunt for Hunho's mother. Rachel, now fully convinced, cocks her submachine gun, her expression turning deadly serious. They exchange a knowing look, both ready for the hunt, their eyes filled with a shared resolve. Together, they look menacing and determined, prepared to unleash havoc on anyone who stands in their way. Hunho's mother slowly opens her eyes, her mind clouded with confusion and disorientation. As her vision clears, she sees Yousef's father sitting in front of her, his presence looming ominously. His voice is calm, almost gentle, as he asks if she's awake, but the tone only serves to amplify her fear. Shocked and startled, she scrambles back, demanding to know who he is. Yousef's father, maintaining his unsettling calmness, apologizes for scaring her. Still, her panic persists as she frantically asks where she is, her last memory being at the hospital. Yousef's father, with an apologetic look, explains that there was no time to inform her properly, so he brought her here in a rush. As the old lady's confusion deepens, she suddenly recognizes her surroundings, her eyes widening with realization. Yousef's father confirms her worst suspicions. They are at the school, specifically in their children's classroom. His voice takes on a haunting tone as he informs her that she is sitting at her son's desk. Her gaze drops to the desk, her face morphing into a mixture of shock, concern, and sorrow as she notices the graffiti, cruel words, and pictures meant to torment Hunho. Yousef's father comments on the cruelty of children, admitting even he was shocked by it. The old lady, horrified and desperate, demands to know why he is showing her this and insists he reveal his identity. Slowly, Yousef's father begins to unravel the bandages from his face, expressing surprise that she doesn't recognize him. As the last of the bandages fall away, the old lady gasps, covering her mouth in horror. His face is a patchwork of deep scars and wounds, a grotesque testament to his suffering. He introduces himself as Yousef's father. Removing a handkerchief, he laments the gruesome state of his face, placing the blame solely on Cion Park. Only the lower half of his face is visible beneath the handkerchief, revealing mottled skin marred by deep slashes across his forehead and a large gash from cheek to cheek. His voice shakes with anger, hatred, and bitter resentment as he recalls Cion's name. Turning away from the old lady, he continues, stating that his son, too, is a victim of Cion's cruelty. He says, Cion is responsible for both their suffering, for the scars they now bear, both physical and emotional. The old lady listens in stunned disbelief, questioning whether Cion could truly be capable of such destruction. Yousef's father presses on, blaming Cion for Hunho's bullying and eventual coma, and accusing him of framing Yousef for these heinous acts. He brings up the rumors of Cion's involvement with gangsters and the photos of his bullying, images that the old lady herself had been shown earlier by the principal. As the memories of those images flash through her mind, Yousef's father loses his composure, screaming in anguish over his failure to protect his son, lamenting how he only realized the extent of the harm too late. In his fervor, he tumbles from his wheelchair, startling the old lady. She watches, horrified, as Yousef's father vows revenge. Crawling on the floor, his demeanor unhinged, he declares that this vengeance will be his penance for failing his child. He whispers to her that this will be their shared repentance for their children's suffering as she helps him back to his knees. Trying to calm him, she suggests they go to the school authorities or involve the police to resolve the matter. But he interrupts her, dismissing her as naive and expressing his disbelief that she expects anything from the school or the authorities. Using the glass of the classroom window to support himself, he makes a poignant argument, reminding her that neither the school nor the authorities acted when her son fell from this very window. As he gestures to the ground 4 stories below, a massive rock sits ominously beneath the window. Yousef's father then reaches into his jacket and pulls out a knife, his voice dark as he declares that Cion cannot be allowed to roam free. If left unchecked, Cion won't stop, he warns. In a stark contrast, we see Cion elsewhere, donning a red and gold Letterman jacket adorned with ornate patterns on the back, preparing for his next move with members of the dead mansion behind him. Back in the classroom, Yousef's father slams the knife down onto the windowsill, declaring that it's time for them to take matters into their own hands. With a twisted, demented smile, he gently passes the knife into Hunho's mother's trembling hands. In the reflection of the blade, her face appears, filled with shock and discomfort, as the weight of the situation presses down on her. The sky is overcast with dark clouds, adding to the moody atmosphere. We see the director's church completely dark, except a single illuminated window, contrasting with the otherwise dark and brooding exterior. The director holding a stack of papers in his hand, his posture tense and authoritative. A shadowy hooded figure stands silently behind him, an ominous presence that adds weight to the moment. The director's gaze is fixed on the papers, but his mind is clearly elsewhere, already formulating his next move. He comments, with a sharp edge to his voice, that he is aware of the situation involving Byungwoo Construction. His tone is laced with frustration as he glances sideways at the shadowy figures lurking at his side, their features obscured but their intentions clear. His anger grows as he considers the audacity of an agency, one without any ties to Korea, that has dared to target Cion without grasping the full scope of the situation. This foreign interference, blind to the intricate dynamics at play, has triggered the director's ire. His expression darkens, the corners of his mouth curling into a grimace that reveals his gleaming, ostentatious teeth. Each one a testament to his carefully cultivated image of power and menace. The anger brewing within him manifests in his thunderous expression, a silent storm of fury and contempt aimed at those who dare to meddle in his domain without the slightest understanding. The shadowy hooded figures behind him remains motionless, a quiet witness to the director's rising wrath as he contemplates the necessary steps to deal with this intrusion. In the school's dimly lit halls, Rachel is on the phone with the director, receiving orders that carry a heavy, lethal weight. The director commands her to make Byungwoo Construction pay dearly for daring to touch the dead mansion's property. The call ends with a clear directive: eradicate the heresy and deliver the hammer of judgment. As Rachel hangs up, a wicked grin spreads across her face, her anticipation for the impending bloodshed almost palpable. The dead mansion team, Rachel, Mary, Eugene, and the recently returned Cion, begin their preparations. Mary calmly checks her pistol, the click of the magazine snapping into place echoing in the room, while Eugene deftly flips his butterfly knife, the blade snapping into position with a practiced flick of his wrist. Both display a cold resolve. Mary's slight smile never reaches her icy eyes, and Eugene's face is set in a serious scowl. The director speaks directly to Cion, tasking him with his first mission to showcase his skills against the Byungwoo Construction Company. Cion, however, interrupts the tense atmosphere by realizing he has forgotten his earpiece on a desk. He turns to the others, asking if anyone has a spare. His request is met with collective disbelief from the team. Rachel, Mary, and Eugene all stare at him with blank, unimpressed expressions, their silence speaking volumes about their disappointment in his lack of preparation. Unfazed by their reactions, Cion asks again, his tone casual, but the responses he receives are anything but. Comments laced with disdain rain down on him, questioning how someone of his legendary status could be so careless and amateurish. Finally, the criticisms hit home, and Cion, looking slightly peevish, mutters an apology. Peering through a nearby window, Cion suddenly shifts focus, asking Rachel if their location is really his school. Rachel confirms, explaining that they tracked their target through traffic camera data. Sion's expression turns serious as he asks about the safety of Hunho and his mother, concern flashing in his eyes. Rachel, however, is unamused, her gaze hardening as she looks at Sion's back. Ready to engage, Rachel grips her submachine gun and coldly reminds Cion that their mission is to annihilate the enemy, not to get sidetracked by trying to save anyone. Cion, facing away from her, clenches his fist in silent determination. His reflection in the classroom mirror shows a man steeling himself for what's to come. With a firm resolve, he acknowledges her words, stating that he knows his task: eliminate all the enemies. In a dimly lit CCTV room, a hulking man dressed in a tight black turtleneck stands watch, his muscled frame barely contained as he monitors the dead mansion members on a wall of screens. His twin pistols rest snugly in a holster, while a knife is strapped to the back of his belt, completing his menacing look. The room is filled with the faint hum of electronics as he studies the footage, recognizing Rachel among the group. His face, chiseled and stern, reflects the gravity of the situation. The golden sunglasses perched on his nose and the earring stud in his ear add an air of intimidation as he murmurs to himself. What was once a job he thought impossible has now become a daunting reality. His adversaries are indeed members of the infamous Dead Mansion. His expression tightens as he realizes the difficulty of the task ahead, asking aloud if they should request additional payment. He turns to his comrade, a slender man sprawled casually across a desk. The comrade's outfit is a stark contrast. He is dressed in a loose gray jacket adorned with a skeleton ribcage design, a vest, and baggy trousers with leg holsters. His long, messy cyan hair falls across his face as he studies the CCTV footage. Despite his nonchalant posture, there's a sharpness in his gaze as he comments on the presence of children in the footage, wondering aloud if they're killers too. The burly man responds with a dismissive wave, assuring his comrade that these kids aren't killers, though his serious tone suggests otherwise. Joseph's father rolls into the room, his wheelchair buzzing slightly as he approaches the pair. The bandages that once concealed his disfigured face are gone, replaced by the grim sight of mottled scars and deep wounds. Clutching a handkerchief to his face, he confirms to the two mercenaries that they'll receive extra payment for the job. His voice trembles in anger slightly as he offers them anything they desire, as long as they ensure the mission's success. His eyes, full of demented desperation, scan the room before he asks about the third member of their team. The burly man explains that his brother is running late, but reassures him that even without him, the two of them are more than enough for the task. The burly man, Dimitri, places a reassuring hand on Joseph's father's shoulder, his touch firm and steady. Dimitri's expression exudes a confidence that borders on arrogance. His sharp eyes locked onto Joseph's father, as if daring him to doubt their capabilities. His physique, rippling with muscle, suggests a man who has seen and conquered countless battles. His comrade chuckles from the desk, teasing Dimitri for his intense demeanor and calling him scary. Dimitri, now relaxed by his comrade's light-hearted remark, smiles in return, though his tone remains deadly serious. Dimitri's gaze sharpens as he pulls his sunglasses tighter to his eyes, veins bulging in his neck and hands. His dangerous aura intensifies as he licks his lips, anticipation building for the violence to come. Despite his fearsome appearance, Dimitri reassures Joseph's father that he is a professional, a man who would never harm a client, but who relishes the destruction he's about to unleash on the Dead Mansion's members. The Dead Mansion members move cautiously up the dimly lit stairwell, their senses on high alert as they scan the area for any sign of the enemy. Cion, with a wary glance toward Mary, remarks that the silence feels unnatural and wonders why they haven't been attacked yet. Mary, her phone in one hand and a gun in the other, checks the tracking information, confirming that this is indeed where the intel indicated the enemy should be. She frowns, noting that the school's cameras have mysteriously stopped working, a detail that only heightens her unease. Eugene, ever practical, suggests to Rachel that they split up to cover more ground, still under the impression that their adversaries are just thugs and henchmen from Byungwoo Construction. Rachel nods in agreement, turning to relay the plan to the team. Cion leans casually against the wall, while Mary raises her hand, volunteering to head to the CCTV room to reactivate the cameras and provide video intel for the group. Rachel, with a stern expression, reminds everyone to keep their communication open and to ensure their earpieces are functioning properly. All eyes turn to Cion, who looks sheepish, having once again forgotten his earpiece. Mary chuckles at his mistake, while Eugene labels him an amateur, adding to Cion's embarrassment. Rachel directs Cion to follow her, deciding they will move together as a team as Cion has no means of communicating with the team, while Eugene volunteers to scout the new building alone. Mary and Eugene head off in the same direction, leaving Cion and Rachel to hang back. As they walk, Rachel hides a smile beneath her hair, teasing that she's excited to be working alone with Cion. The comment makes Cion uncomfortable, and he awkwardly calls out to any potential enemies, hoping to dispel the tension and avoid being alone with Rachel. Suddenly, Rachel's tone shifts drastically, her playful demeanor vanishing as she confronts Cion with a serious expression. She questions whether Cion has given up on Hunho and his mother yet, catching him off guard. His expression shifts to one of surprise, but Rachel continues, pressing him on his obsession with the two of them. Cion tries to interject, denying any obsession, but Rachel insists that he needs to let go. She warns him that the more he clings to them, the more he endangers them. Cion, visibly shaken, asks what she means by this, and Rachel explains bluntly, their lives have been upended simply because of their association with him. In just a few days, they've become major targets for the Dead Mansion and even fell into the hands of the Byungwoo Construction Company. Rachel steps into Sion's personal space, her expression deadly, and drives her point home. If it weren't for him, Hunho and his mother would have lived ordinary, peaceful lives. Sion's mind flashes to an imagined future where Hunho and his mother are happy, the old lady bringing snacks to a smiling Hunho, a future that could have been possible if not for his involvement. The scene shifts to a flashback of Sion's initial encounter with Hunho and his mother, as Rachel coldly reminds him that his presence in their lives brought the Dead Mansion's deadly influence with it. Cion envisions himself walking away, leaving behind a trail of deep crimson blood, symbolizing the destruction that follows him and taints the lives of innocent people. Rachel's voice drips with malice as she tells him that their lives crumbled because of him, and him alone. Cion is left distressed, grappling with the weight of Rachel's accusations. Doubt creeps into his mind as he wonders if he is truly to blame. Rachel, seizing the moment, steps even closer, her gun in hand, and tells him to abandon his obsession. She insists that the only place he belongs is with the Dead Mansion, her words hanging in the air like a dark omen as Cion struggles with the growing conflict within himself. Sion's focus sharpens as he snaps out of his dark thoughts, his eyes suddenly alight with awareness. Instinctively, he pushes Rachel aside and dives to the ground, narrowly avoiding a bullet that slices through the air where they had just been standing. The gunshot's echo lingers as Dimitri, a towering figure, emerges from the shadows, acknowledging Sion's quick reaction with a smirk. Rachel, taken aback, turns her gaze toward Dimitri, her shock evident. Cion, still reeling from the near miss, demands to know the identity of the man standing before them. The imposing figure formally introduces himself as Dmitry Medvedev, the second in command of the feared Russian mercenary group Barefoot. Draped over his shoulder is Mary, bruised and battered, her clothes dirtied from a brutal encounter. Dimitri holds her effortlessly while keeping his gun trained on Rachel and Cion. It has been 2 years since he last crossed paths with Rachel during an operation in Vladivostok, a detail he recalls with a hint of nostalgia. Mary remains unconscious on Dimitri's shoulder, her lifeless form a stark reminder of the mercenaries' capabilities. Rachel's heart sinks as she calls out to Mary, but there's no response. With a casual motion, Dimitri drops Mary to the ground like discarded luggage, mentioning with cruel indifference that he encountered her loitering and decided to have some fun. Rachel's expression darkens into one of pure hatred, her teeth clenched in fury. Dimitri, unfazed, tells her to stop glaring, reminding her that his mission is to target the Dead Mansion. Despite any personal feelings, he remains a professional, bound by the contract that brought him here. Rachel, her rage barely contained, raises her submachine gun, locking her aim on Dimitri. Sensing the escalating tension, Dimitri shifts his aim toward Mary's prone body, urging everyone to remain calm and professional, reminding them that emotions have no place in their line of work. Though still seething, Rachel lowers her weapon slightly, her anger tempered by the danger to Mary. Dimitri, ever the provocateur, suggests that he might let them go if Rachel agrees to a date with him, his tongue piercing glinting as he slides his sunglasses down his nose, licking his lips. Rachel's response is immediate and explosive. She shouts in Russian for Dimitri to get lost, launching herself into action and firing wildly at him. Dimitri, quick on his feet, dives through a window into a classroom, his smile never wavering. He lands gracefully, gun in hand, and returns fire, forcing Rachel to evade as bullets tear through her long trench coat. Unfazed, Rachel ejects the spent magazines from her weapons, a submachine gun in her right hand, a pistol in her left, and reloads with practiced precision. Her expression grows more serious as she considers the new reality of facing barefoot, realizing that the stakes have risen dramatically. Leaping into action, Rachel crouches low and fires another barrage at Dimitri, her movements fluid and relentless. As she does so, she calls out to Cion, urging him to recognize the dangerous world he has dragged Hunho and his mother into. Glancing sideways, she's shocked to find that Cion is no longer beside her. She has been speaking to empty space. Rachel's surprise quickly turns to resolve as she ejects her spent magazines again, preparing for yet another round of their deadly exchange. Meanwhile, Dimitri pulls back the slide on his pistol, using the window as cover. He muses aloud about Rachel's fiery nature, considering it a waste to kill someone as formidable as her, even if it is his mission. As he raises his head above the window, he wonders how much more she can take before she collapses. But before he can dwell on the thought, he senses movement. Cion, crouched on the opposite side of the window, prepares for an attack. Dimitri's smile widens, recognizing the challenge before him. Without warning, both men spring into action. Dimitri fires several shots, but Cion is already in motion. He grabs Dimitri's hand, forcing the gun upwards as bullets fly dangerously close. With a swift motion, Cion plants his foot on the windowsill, using it as leverage to propel himself into the classroom. The impact pushes Dimitri off balance, and Cion capitalizes on the moment, delivering a powerful punch to Dimitri's face. The blow drives Dimitri to the ground, a move that has incapacitated many before him. Cion stands over Dimitri, his expression deadly serious. To his surprise, Dimitri barely flinches from the attack. Blood streams from his nose, and his sunglasses lie shattered on the ground beside him, but he remains unfazed. Instead, Dimitri grins, licking the blood from his nose with a twisted sense of satisfaction. He acknowledges Cion as a worthy adversary, one far more challenging than Mary. Despite the pain and the blood, Dimitri's confidence remains unshaken, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous excitement for the battle still to come.